Introduction. Beyond the familiar sphere. Climate, nature, civilization, and religion. Before the exploration of the shaped universes, the world Assal knows is defined by the spherical nature of existence. The climate is stable, governed by the predictable cycles of seasons, weather patterns, and the gravitational pull of a spherical planet. The air is familiar, filled with the balanced warmth of the sun and the cooling breezes that bring rain and life. Nature here is rich and diverse, but predictable in its growth. Trees reach upward, plants spread outward, and animals follow their migratory paths in sync with the rhythmic cycles of day and night, summer and winter. Civilization on this spherical planet has developed under the steady influence of gravity, where societies grow based on an understanding of the predictable forces of nature. People build cities, cultivate crops, and explore the world using technology designed to harness the spherical symmetry of the Earth. Knowledge is structured, much like the world itself, with science and spirituality often reflecting the order found in the universe. Religion on this planet is shaped by the concept of cycles and balance. Ancient civilizations worship the sun, moon, and stars, interpreting their steady movement across the sky as a sign of divine order. Modern religions maintain this sense of order, with beliefs that emphasize the harmony of creation, the circular nature of time, and the balance between the forces of life and death. Temples, churches, and sacred spaces are built to align with the cycles of the universe, reflecting the belief that the spherical world mirrors the divine structure of existence. Assal had always been curious. Ever since she was a child, she questioned everything: why the stars glittered in the night sky, how gravity kept her feet planted on the earth, and what lay beyond the edge of the universe. She never stopped wondering. Now, standing on the precipice of discovery, Assal was about to go beyond the limits of her imagination, into realms where the very shape of the universe itself would change, and the laws of nature would no longer behave as she had known them. Her journey had begun in the world we know, the spherical universe, where gravity pulls everything downwards and the stars form distant points in the infinite stretch of space. But what if this wasn't the only way? What if the universe, or others like it, could take on different shapes? Assal would soon find out, as her path would take her through strange, unimaginable worlds where gravity, time, and reality itself bent and twisted in ways she could barely comprehend. Her journey wasn't just about exploration. It was about survival, adaptation, and the question that had haunted her since childhood: what if the universe was something entirely different from what we believe? As we follow Assal through these shaped universes, we will witness her growth, her challenges, and her triumphs. We will see how she, and perhaps we, might adapt to the strange forces of a cylindrical world, the intense gravity of a pyramid-shaped universe, or the disorienting pull of a cubical cosmos. Her journey is ours, a journey beyond the familiar, into the very heart of the unknown. Chapter 1. The Cylindrical Universe. Climate, Nature, Civilization, and Religion. The cylindrical universe is a world where the forces of nature spiral along the axis, creating a stable climate that subtly varies depending on one's position in relation to the central axis. Winds are strongest near the center, forming perpetual currents that power cities and shape the land. Rainfall is distributed unevenly, with fertile regions near the spirals producing lush forests and meadows, while dry areas line the outer edges. Wildlife has evolved to glide gracefully with the spiral, their elongated forms designed to move effortlessly through the constant gravitational pull. Civilization in this universe thrives in sync with the spiral. Cities are built along the curvature, with sleek structures that twist upward, designed to capture and harness the spiraling forces for power and transportation. The inhabitants are tall and elegant, their movements flowing in harmony with the spiral's rhythm. Society revolves around balance and fluidity, with technology focused on using the natural rotational energy to enhance daily life. From architecture to art, every aspect of their culture reflects the twisting patterns of the universe. Religiously, the spiral itself is sacred. The people of the cylindrical universe revere it as the essence of life and existence, believing that the spiral represents the eternal flow of time, energy, and knowledge. Their faith is centered around the worship of deities known as the Flowing Ones, who are thought to govern the forces of gravity and time. Temples are built along the central axis, where the pull of the spiral is strongest, and rituals involve movements designed to mimic the spiral's graceful flow. Followers believe that by aligning themselves with the spiral's forces, they can achieve spiritual balance and even influence time itself. Assal's story begins in the world we all know, our Earth, shaped by the forces of the Ice Age. She imagined the early humans, shivering in the cold, building fires in their caves to keep the darkness at bay. But they, like her, had no idea what lay beyond the sky they looked upon every night. Assal grew up dreaming of the stars. In her small village, she would sneak out at night, her breath steaming in the cold air, to lie in the fields and stare up at the sky. She felt a strange connection to the universe, a pull that told her there was more than what she could see. Perhaps it was the same pull those early humans felt, as they looked up and saw the same stars, millions of years ago. But where they had only seen distant points of light, Assal saw possibilities. And as she grew older, she became more determined to explore those possibilities. Now, standing on the edge of discovery, Assal would embark on a journey that would take her beyond the limits of the known universe. But first, she would need to understand how the forces of nature worked here, in the familiar world. Gravity pulled her down, time moved forward, and light traveled in straight lines. But what if she stepped into a different universe, one where none of those things were true? As she prepared to take her first step into the unknown, Assal wondered how she would survive in a place where gravity pulled sideways or where time flowed in a spiral. But if her ancestors could survive the Ice Age, could she survive the strangeness that awaited her? Chapter 1: The Cylindrical Universe. Climate, Nature, Civilization, and Religion. The cylindrical universe is a world where the forces of nature spiral along the axis, creating a stable climate that subtly varies depending on one's position in relation to the central axis. Winds are strongest near the center, forming perpetual currents that power cities and shape the land. Rainfall is distributed unevenly, with fertile regions near the spirals producing lush forests and meadows, while dry areas line the outer edges. Wildlife has evolved to glide gracefully with the spiral, their elongated forms designed to move effortlessly through the constant gravitational pull. Civilization in this universe thrives in sync with the spiral. Cities are built along the curvature, with sleek structures that twist upward, designed to capture and harness the spiraling forces for power and transportation. The inhabitants are tall and elegant, their movements flowing in harmony with the spiral's rhythm. Society revolves around balance and fluidity, with technology focused on using the natural rotational energy to enhance daily life. From architecture to art, every aspect of their culture reflects the twisting patterns of the universe. Religiously, the spiral itself is sacred. The people of the cylindrical universe revere it as the essence of life and existence, believing that the spiral represents the eternal flow of time, energy, and knowledge. Their faith is centered around the worship of deities known as the Flowing Ones, who are thought to govern the forces of gravity and time. Temples are built along the central axis, where the pull of the spiral is strongest, and rituals involve movements designed to mimic the spiral's graceful flow. Followers believe that by aligning themselves with the spiral's forces, they can achieve spiritual balance and even influence time itself. Assal's story begins in the world we all know, our Earth, shaped by the forces of the Ice Age. She imagined the early humans, shivering in the cold, building fires in their caves to keep the darkness at bay. But they, like her, had no idea what lay beyond the sky they looked upon every night. Assal grew up dreaming of the stars. In her small village, she would sneak out at night, her breath steaming in the cold air, to lie in the fields and stare up at the sky. She felt a strange connection to the universe, a pull that told her there was more than what she could see. Perhaps it was the same pull those early humans felt, as they looked up and saw the same stars, millions of years ago. But where they had only seen distant points of light, Assal saw possibilities. And as she grew older, she became more determined to explore those possibilities. Now, standing on the edge of discovery, Assal would embark on a journey that would take her beyond the limits of the known universe. But first, she would need to understand how the forces of nature worked here, in the familiar world. Gravity pulled her down, time moved forward, and light traveled in straight lines. But what if she stepped into a different universe, one where none of those things were true? As she prepared to take her first step into the unknown, Assal wondered how she would survive in a place where gravity pulled sideways or where time flowed in a spiral. But if her ancestors could survive the Ice Age, could she survive the strangeness that awaited her? Chapter 2: The Conical Universe. Climate, Nature, Civilization, and Religion. The conical universe is a world of stark contrasts. At the base, the climate is mild and fertile, with gentle rains and abundant sunlight supporting vast forests, meadows, and thriving ecosystems. The air is light, and gravity is minimal, allowing the land to flourish with ease. As one ascends the cone, the environment becomes increasingly hostile. The mid-layers experience cooler temperatures, powerful winds, and rugged terrain, with hardy plants and animals clinging to life. Near the apex, the climate is severe. Cold winds sweep across barren rock, and the crushing gravity makes survival nearly impossible for all but the most resilient organisms. Civilization is deeply shaped by these environmental differences. At the base, life is comfortable, and society reflects this ease, with sprawling cities that blend seamlessly into the natural landscape. The people live leisurely lives, focusing on art, community, and agriculture. As one moves up the cone, society becomes more industrious, with technological advancements designed to counter the increasing gravity. Cities in the middle regions are compact and fortified, built to withstand the intense natural forces. At the apex, only a few live, a spiritual elite who endure the crushing gravity in search of enlightenment. These individuals, known as the Ascendants, believe that by surviving the harshest conditions, they come closer to understanding the universe's deepest truths. The religion in the conical universe reflects the journey from the base to the apex. At the base, where life is abundant, the people worship deities of growth, fertility, and harmony, believing the universe to be a benevolent force. Their temples are large, open-air structures built in harmony with nature, celebrating the abundance provided by the divine. However, as one ascends the cone, religious beliefs become more ascetic. Those who dwell in the middle layers worship gods of resilience and endurance, seeking strength to survive the harsher conditions. The apex dwellers, however, follow a path of spiritual purity. They believe that the crushing gravity at the apex represents the universe's ultimate test of faith, and that only through enduring this force can one transcend the physical world and achieve spiritual enlightenment. Their temples are small, isolated shrines, where meditation and contemplation are the central practices. Assal stepped through the portal, leaving behind the familiar, spherical world. Her breath caught as she emerged into a universe unlike anything she had ever seen. The first thing she noticed was the sky, or, rather, the lack of one. Instead of a dome of stars above her, there was an infinite tunnel stretching in both directions. This was the cylindrical universe. The ground beneath her feet curved upward, disappearing into the horizon, and gravity, rather than pulling her straight down, seemed to tug her toward the center of the cylinder. Assal felt her body shift slightly as she adjusted to the strange pull. Walking here was disorienting. Every step felt like she was moving in two directions at once, toward the center and forward. She realized quickly that this universe would challenge everything she knew about space and movement. Even light seemed to behave differently here, curving along the walls of the cylinder, making it difficult to tell where objects were in relation to her. As Assal continued her exploration, she realized that the beings who lived in this universe must have adapted in ways she couldn't even fathom. Perhaps their bodies were elongated, designed to spiral along the axis of the cylinder. Or maybe they had developed technologies to manipulate the forces pulling them toward the center. Assal wondered what it would feel like to live in such a world, to never know the feeling of standing still. Her mind raced with possibilities. Could civilizations here have discovered ways to harness the rotational forces of the cylinder for energy? How would they have developed architecture that resisted the constant pull of gravity toward the center? What kind of social structures would emerge in a world where movement was always in flux? And yet, despite the strangeness of this universe, Assal found herself oddly at peace. The constant motion, the feeling of being pulled in multiple directions, reminded her of her own journey, always searching, always moving forward, even when the path seemed uncertain. Perhaps, she thought, the inhabitants of this universe felt the same way, constantly adapting, constantly evolving to survive in a world that never stood still. As she prepared to leave the cylindrical universe behind, Assal couldn't help but wonder, what would the next universe be like? What new challenges, and new wonders, awaited her in the next shaped realm? Chapter 3: The Cubical Universe. Climate, Nature, Civilization, and Religion. The cubical universe is defined by its sharp angles and distinct edges, which create varied climates across the faces, edges, and corners of the cube. The faces experience a balanced, temperate climate with moderate seasons, allowing for a stable environment where plants and animals thrive in relative harmony. Large forests, plains, and lakes spread across the flat faces, supporting a wide range of wildlife and agriculture. However, as one moves toward the edges and corners of the cube, the climate becomes increasingly extreme. The gravitational forces intensify near the edges, creating harsher winds and unstable weather patterns. The corners, where gravity is strongest, are almost uninhabitable, with frigid temperatures and barren landscapes. Only the most resilient forms of life manage to survive in these regions, adapting to the intense gravitational pressure. Civilization in the cubical universe is shaped by these varied conditions. The inhabitants of the faces live peaceful, balanced lives, building expansive cities that reflect the harmony of their environment. Their architecture is geometric and precise, with an emphasis on symmetry and stability. Life here is centered around art, philosophy, and science, with the inhabitants focusing on intellectual pursuits and innovation. In contrast, the people who live near the edges and corners have developed a rugged, industrious society. They live in fortified settlements, relying on advanced technology to withstand the harsh gravitational forces. These people are resourceful and resilient, their culture emphasizing survival, engineering, and the mastery of the intense conditions that define their world. Religiously, the cubical universe is divided. The people of the faces worship deities of balance and order, believing that the cube represents the perfect harmony of the universe. Their temples are grand, symmetrical structures, built to reflect the balance of the world, and their rituals focus on maintaining equilibrium in both the physical and spiritual realms. Those living near the edges and corners follow a different faith, centered around gods of strength and endurance. They believe that the intense gravitational forces near the corners are manifestations of divine power, and that surviving these forces is a test of their worthiness. Their temples are small and fortified, built to withstand the elements, and their religious practices involve rigorous physical challenges and acts of endurance, through which they seek to prove their strength to the gods. Assal stepped through the portal once more, leaving the spiraling cylinder world behind. She felt a brief moment of disorientation as the fabric of space around her shifted again, twisting into a new form. When her vision cleared, she found herself standing at the wide base of an immense, cone-shaped universe. The sky here was unlike anything she had ever seen at the base of the cone. The universe seemed vast and expansive, spreading out in every direction. But as her eyes traced the sky upward, the world seemed to narrow, tapering off into a distant point far above her. There was a strange beauty to it, the way the horizon stretched out endlessly before her while the apex loomed impossibly far away, almost like a distant star. The air felt different here, denser, heavier, and she noticed that the gravitational pull was much weaker than what she had experienced in the cylindrical universe. With each step, Assal felt lighter, as if the ground beneath her feet barely held her. She wondered what it would be like to live in a world where gravity felt so gentle, almost absent. But her curiosity quickly turned to concern as she looked up toward the apex. The further one ascended the cone, the stronger the gravitational pull would become, and the more intense the environment. Life at the base of the cone might be peaceful and slow, but the higher one climbed, the more challenging it would become to survive. Assal imagined the civilizations that might live here at the base. Where the pull of gravity was weakest, there could be sprawling cities, filled with beings who moved gracefully, almost effortlessly, across the land. Their lives would be defined by abundance and ease, as resources and energy flowed freely in the wide, open space. Perhaps these beings had grown used to the comfort of their low-gravity environment, evolving to be tall and delicate, with long limbs that allowed them to move with fluid grace. But what about those who lived closer to the apex? Assal's mind raced as she considered the possibility. The higher up one went, the stronger the gravitational pull would become, compressing everything, forcing life to adapt in extreme ways. The beings who lived here might be shorter, stockier, their bodies built to withstand the crushing force of gravity. Every movement would be a struggle, every breath a laborious effort. But in their struggle, these beings might have developed incredible strength and resilience, able to endure hardships that those at the base could never imagine. She wondered what kind of society would emerge in such a world. Would there be division between the people at the base and those near the apex? Perhaps those at the top, despite the hardships, held a special place in society, viewed as more powerful, more enlightened, because of their ability to endure the intense gravitational forces. Or maybe the opposite was true. Perhaps the beings at the base lived in envy of the apex dwellers, imagining their struggles as a test of will, a path towards some higher form of existence. Assal felt a pull in her own heart, a curiosity that urged her to ascend the cone, to see what lay at the apex. But as she took her first few steps upward, she felt the change almost immediately. With each step, the air grew thicker, and gravity began to press down on her more heavily. Her body felt denser, her limbs heavier. It was as if the universe itself was challenging her to keep moving forward. She pushed onward, determined to reach the apex. As she climbed, the landscape around her began to change. The lush greenery of the base gave way to more barren, rocky terrain. Plants grew shorter, their leaves thicker and tougher, better suited to the crushing gravity. The creatures she encountered here were different as well, smaller, more compact, their bodies built for survival in this hostile environment. By the time Assal reached the midway point, she was struggling to move. Each step felt like lifting the weight of the world. She could feel the pull of the apex, growing stronger with every moment, calling to her like a distant, unreachable dream. She realized now why so few beings from the base dared to make this journey. It was a test of willpower, of strength, of survival. But she couldn't stop, not yet. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Assal reached the apex. The ground beneath her feet was hard and unyielding, and the air was thick with pressure. Looking down, she could see the entire cone stretched out beneath her, the vast, sprawling base, the narrowing sides, and the long, slow ascent she had made. At the apex, Assal found a strange stillness. Time seemed to slow, and the crushing pressure that had weighed her down now felt like a gentle embrace. She realized that those who lived here, at the apex, must have developed an entirely different understanding of the universe. Here, gravity wasn't just a force, it was a way of life. Every movement, every breath, was a reminder of the universe's shape, of the constant pull toward the center. Assal sat down at the apex, feeling the weight of the world around her. She had made the journey, just as so many beings in this universe had done before her. And now, she understood something that she hadn't before. Each universe, each shape, was not just a physical space, but a way of being. The beings who lived here had adapted, evolved, and thrived within the constraints of their world, just as she was learning to adapt to hers. As she prepared to leave the conical universe, Assal wondered what the next shaped realm would hold. Each world seemed to challenge her in new ways, revealing deeper truths about the nature of existence, and about herself. In the next chapter, Assal will find herself in a cubical universe, where the sharp edges and corners of the world create strange gravitational forces and divide space into 6 distinct faces. She will explore how life and technology adapt to these unique conditions, and how civilizations might develop in a universe with such rigid boundaries. Chapter 4: The Tesseract Universe. Climate, Nature, Civilization, and Religion. The Tesseract universe exists in a state of multidimensional complexity, where time and space fold in on themselves. The climate here is dynamic and fluid, changing based on one's position within the universe's many layers of dimensions. The physical environment is difficult to describe in traditional terms, as the landscape shifts depending on the observer's perspective. In one moment, it may appear as a vibrant meadow, and in the next, it transforms into a series of floating islands suspended between planes of reality. The natural world is as fluid as the flow of time itself, with plants, animals, and ecosystems existing across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The wildlife in the Tesseract universe has evolved to adapt to the ever-changing nature of space and time. Beings move through these dimensions effortlessly, flickering in and out of existence, capable of existing in multiple places at once. Trees and plants stretch not just upward but through dimensions, their roots disappearing into spaces beyond the visible world. Civilization in the Tesseract universe is built around an understanding of the fluidity of reality. Cities are vast and multidimensional, with buildings that exist in several planes at once, shifting and changing shape as time and space fold around them. The inhabitants have learned to manipulate these dimensions, using advanced technology that allows them to travel through time as easily as they move through space. They live in a state of perpetual awareness, experiencing past, present, and future simultaneously, and their society reflects this profound understanding of the universe's complexity. Religion in the Tesseract universe revolves around the worship of the Eternal Ones, deities who are believed to exist outside of time and space. The people see the Tesseract as a divine structure, representing the infinite possibilities of existence. Their temples are multidimensional constructs that can only be perceived fully by those who have achieved spiritual enlightenment, allowing them to see across the various layers of reality. Rituals involve the synchronization of time and space, where worshippers enter a trance-like state, aligning themselves with the flow of the universe's many dimensions. The ultimate goal of their faith is to transcend linear existence and become one with the infinite, where past, present, and future merge into a single eternal moment. Assal stepped through the portal once again, leaving behind the narrowing forces of the conical universe. The moment she emerged, she felt an immediate shift in her surroundings. This universe felt rigid, angular, and strangely divided. As her eyes adjusted, she found herself standing on a flat, seemingly endless plain, but the sky was unlike anything she had ever seen. Looking up, Assal realized that this universe was shaped like a massive cube. The horizon didn't curve gently away, as it had in the cylindrical or spherical universes. Instead, it stretched straight ahead, coming to an abrupt halt at the edge of the cube's face. In the distance, she could make out the sharp lines where one face of the cube met another, creating a stark, angular landscape. The most unsettling sight of all was the realization that the sky was simply another face of the cube above her, a flat plane hovering far overhead. The air felt heavy, not from gravity, but from the strange way this universe was divided. Gravity here didn't pull toward a central point like in her home universe. Instead, it seemed to vary based on her position. The closer Assal moved toward one of the cube's edges, the stronger the gravitational pull became, as if the universe itself was trying to fold in on her. The corners, she realized, would be the most dangerous places of all regions where the gravitational forces from multiple faces converged, creating crushing pressure. She started walking, her steps cautious as she tried to make sense of this new world. Unlike the conical universe, where gravity shifted gradually, the cubical universe had sharp, abrupt changes in force. The further she walked, the more she noticed how objects around her behaved. Near the center of each face, gravity was relatively stable, but as she approached the edges, objects became distorted. Small rocks floated slightly off the ground before slamming back down when they reached the boundary between faces. Assal imagined what life would be like here, in a world where gravity pulled you toward the edges and corners, rather than down. How would beings adapt to a place with such stark divisions? Would they avoid the dangerous edges and corners, preferring to live in the relative safety of the face's center? Or would they have developed technologies to manipulate the gravitational forces, allowing them to harness the intense energy at the cube's boundaries? As she continued her journey across the face, she came across strange structures, buildings, perhaps but unlike any she had seen before. These structures were angular, built to withstand the varying gravitational forces of the cubical universe. The buildings at the center of the face were tall and elegant, stretching upward as if reaching for the sky. But near the edges, the architecture changed. The buildings became shorter, sturdier, designed to resist the intense pull of gravity that grew stronger as one approached the boundary between faces. Assal marveled at the ingenuity of the beings who must have built these structures. They had learned to live in harmony with the geometry of their universe, adapting their architecture and their way of life to the forces that governed their world. But what about the beings themselves? She wondered if they, too, had evolved in response to the unique conditions of the cubical universe. Perhaps their bodies were angular, like their surroundings, built to withstand the sharp changes in gravitational force. Or maybe they had developed a way to manipulate gravity itself, allowing them to move freely between the faces of the cube. As she approached the edge of the face, Assal felt the gravitational pull growing stronger. Her body felt heavier, her steps slower. The edge of the cube loomed before her, a sharp line that divided the face she stood on from the one above. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what would happen if she crossed the boundary. But her curiosity outweighed her caution, and with a deep breath, she stepped across the edge. The transition was immediate and jarring. Gravity shifted abruptly, pulling her in a new direction, toward the face she now stood on. The world flipped, and for a moment, Assal lost her balance, tumbling to the ground as she struggled to adjust. She had expected the shift to be gradual, but the cube's geometry allowed no such smooth transitions. Everything here was sharp, angular, and unforgiving. As she regained her footing, she looked back at the face she had just crossed. It felt like an entirely different world now, even though she had only taken a few steps. The beings who lived here must have learned to navigate these sharp transitions, adapting their movements and their technology to survive in a universe where space itself was divided into rigid, angular sections. Assal imagined the societies that would develop in such a world. The inhabitants of one face might have little contact with those on another, their lives separated by the sharp boundaries of the cube. Each face could develop its own unique culture, shaped by the specific gravitational conditions and environment of that region. Trade between faces might be difficult, requiring advanced technology to safely traverse the dangerous edges and corners of the cube. And what about the corners? Assal shuddered at the thought. The corners of the cube would be regions where gravitational forces from 3 different faces converged, creating intense pressure and distortion. Only the bravest or the most foolish would venture into those regions. Yet, she couldn't help but wonder if there were beings who lived near the corners, their bodies and minds adapted to the crushing forces that ruled those dangerous spaces. As Assal prepared to leave the cubical universe, she felt a newfound respect for the beings who lived here. They had learned to thrive in a world of sharp angles and rigid boundaries, where gravity pulled in unexpected directions, and space itself was divided into distinct, unforgiving sections. She realized that, just like in the other universes she had visited, life had found a way to adapt, to survive, and even to flourish in the most unlikely of environments. But what would the next universe hold? Each step in her journey brought new challenges and new wonders, and Assal was ready for whatever came next. Chapter 5. The Mobius Universe. Climate, Nature, Civilization, and Religion. The Mobius Universe is a strange, twisting realm where time and space loop back on themselves in an endless cycle. The climate here reflects the cyclical nature of the universe, with seasons and weather patterns repeating in predictable, unchanging loops. The world experiences a constant alternation between calm, temperate conditions and periods of harsh, unpredictable storms, all occurring in a continuous cycle that mirrors the Mobius strip's one-sided, infinite surface. Despite the shifts, inhabitants of this world have learned to adapt, knowing that everything eventually returns to its starting point. The landscape of the Mobius universe is similarly affected by the looping nature of reality. Rivers flow in continuous circles, never truly beginning or ending, and mountains stretch infinitely, folding back on themselves in impossible ways. Flora and fauna have evolved to thrive in this repetitive environment, with plants regrowing in perfect cycles and animals living their lives in predictable patterns, never straying from the path set by the flow of time and space. Civilization in the Mobius universe is based on the concept of the eternal return. The inhabitants live in towns and cities that are built to reflect the looping nature of their world, with streets and structures designed in continuous, circular patterns. Society is focused on maintaining harmony with the cycle of life, and everything from technology to art reflects the idea of endless repetition. The people of this world value patience and foresight, knowing that everything they do will eventually come full circle. Their society is stable and slow-moving, with little need for haste or change, as all things will inevitably return to their origin. Religiously, the people of the Mobius universe follow a belief system centered around the eternal cycle, a doctrine that teaches that life, death, and rebirth are all part of an unbroken loop. They believe that time is not linear, but rather a never-ending loop that will continue forever. Their deities are seen as guardians of the cycle, ensuring that the flow of time and space remains intact. Temples are built in circular formations, with rituals focused on reinforcing the belief that every action, every event, and every life will eventually return to its starting point. The central religious practice is meditation on the cyclical nature of existence, with the ultimate spiritual goal being the acceptance of the eternal loop and the ability to navigate it consciously in future iterations of life. Assal stepped through the portal, leaving behind the rigid, angular world of the cubical universe. The moment she arrived in the next shaped realm, she felt an overwhelming sense of scale. This universe, unlike the others, stretched upward in a massive, awe-inspiring pyramid. The base of the pyramid was wide and expansive, filled with light and warmth. As she looked upward, she could see the pyramid tapering off into a distant, seemingly unreachable apex. The landscape at the base was lush and fertile, with rolling hills and vast fields that stretched far into the distance. But the further up the pyramid one traveled, the more barren and desolate the terrain became, until, at the apex, it seemed as though nothing could survive. The air at the base was light and easy to breathe, and gravity was gentle, making Assal feel almost weightless. She could see signs of life all around her: trees, plants, and even small animals that darted through the underbrush. This world, at least at the base of the pyramid, seemed almost idyllic. But Assal knew that the true challenge lay in what awaited her further up. As she began her ascent, she noticed something strange. The higher she climbed, the more the world around her seemed to change. The air grew denser, the gravity stronger, and the temperature cooler. The lush greenery of the base gradually gave way to rocky outcrops and barren, windswept landscapes. It was clear that life in this universe was stratified. The beings at the base lived in comfort, while those higher up faced increasingly harsh conditions. Assal wondered what kind of beings might inhabit this world. Those who lived at the base of the pyramid would likely be peaceful, their lives defined by abundance and ease. They would have little need for complex technologies or tools, as the environment provided everything they needed. But the further up one went, the more difficult survival would become. The beings who lived near the apex would have to be strong, resilient, and resourceful, their bodies and minds hardened by the harsh conditions. As Assal climbed higher, the path became steeper, and the air grew colder. The landscape around her was barren now, with only a few hardy plants clinging to life in the rocky soil. She could feel the gravitational pull increasing with every step, making her movements slower and more difficult. It was as if the universe itself was testing her resolve, challenging her to keep going despite the growing weight on her shoulders. She thought of the beings who must live here, near the apex. How had they adapted to such extreme conditions? Their bodies would have to be incredibly strong to withstand the crushing gravity, and their minds sharp and focused to survive in a world where every breath was a struggle. Assal imagined a society built around endurance, where the journey toward the apex was seen as a rite of passage, a test of one's strength and determination. As she continued her ascent, she noticed strange markings on the rock symbols carved into the stone, guiding her upward. These markings seemed to suggest that others had made this journey before her, climbing toward the apex in search of something greater. Perhaps the beings of this universe saw the apex as a place of enlightenment, a point where one could transcend the physical world and reach a higher state of consciousness. Assal's thoughts turned inward as she pushed herself onward. The gravitational force was now almost unbearable, pressing down on her with incredible intensity. Every step felt like a monumental effort, and her body ached with the strain. But she couldn't stop. Something about the apex called to her, urging her forward, even as her mind and body begged her to turn back. Finally, after what felt like hours of climbing, she reached the apex. The ground beneath her was cold and hard, and the air was so thin that every breath felt like a struggle. Looking around, she saw that the apex was a narrow, isolated point, surrounded by a vast emptiness. The gravity here was so strong that it seemed to pull everything inward, toward the sharp point at the top of the pyramid. Assal stood there for a moment, catching her breath, before she noticed something extraordinary. At the very tip of the apex, the laws of physics seemed to bend and distort. Time itself felt different here, slower, more fluid. The world around her seemed to shimmer, as if reality itself was unraveling at the edges. She realized that the beings who lived near the apex must have a completely different understanding of the universe than those at the base. Here, at the very tip of the pyramid, the normal rules of physics no longer applied. Time and space twisted and warped, creating an environment that was as mentally challenging as it was physically. The beings who lived here, Assal imagined, had developed not just physical strength but an incredible mental discipline, allowing them to navigate the strange, distorted reality that surrounded the apex. As she stood there, Assal felt a profound sense of clarity. The journey to the apex had been difficult, but it had taught her something important, that the shape of the universe could shape the beings who lived within it. The harsh conditions near the apex had forced the inhabitants of this universe to grow stronger, both physically and mentally. But at the base, where life was easier, the beings might never know the strength and resilience that came from enduring such challenges. With a final glance at the shimmering, distorted reality around her, Assal began her descent. As she made her way back down the pyramid, the gravity slowly lessened, and the air grew warmer and easier to breathe. The landscape became greener and more inviting, and by the time she reached the base, it was as though she had stepped into an entirely different world. As Assal prepared to leave the pyramid universe, she reflected on the lessons she had learned. Each shaped universe had its own challenges, its own way of shaping the beings who lived within it. But no matter the shape, no matter the challenges, life always found a way to adapt and thrive. Her journey was far from over, and Assal knew that the next universe would bring new challenges and new insights. But she was ready for whatever came next. Chapter 6: The Pyramidal Universe. Climate, Nature, Civilization, and Religion. The pyramidal universe is structured in layers, with the base experiencing a mild, abundant climate while the apex endures harsh, extreme conditions. The base is warm and fertile, with thriving forests, rivers, and abundant wildlife. The air is light, and the gravitational pull is gentle, allowing nature to flourish easily. As one ascends the pyramid, the climate becomes more challenging. Mid-levels experience cooler temperatures, stronger winds, and sparse vegetation, with animals and plants adapted to survive in a more rugged, difficult environment. At the apex, the air is thin and cold, and the crushing gravity makes the landscape barren, with only the most resilient life forms clinging to survival. Civilization in the pyramidal universe reflects the structure of the pyramid itself. At the base, life is peaceful, and society thrives in harmony with nature. The people live in sprawling cities built from natural materials, focused on art, leisure, and community. As one moves upward, the population becomes more industrious and resourceful. The mid-levels are populated by engineers, traders, and inventors, who have developed advanced technology to withstand the increasing gravity and harsher conditions. Their cities are more compact and fortified, designed to protect against the environment's growing challenges. At the apex, only a few dwell. These individuals, known as the Seekers, have dedicated their lives to spiritual enlightenment, believing that the challenges of the apex provide the ultimate test of endurance and willpower. Their small, isolated communities are built into the harsh rock, and they spend their days in contemplation and meditation, seeking deeper truths about the universe and their place within it. Religion in the pyramidal universe is deeply tied to the journey from the base to the apex. At the base, where life is easy, the people worship gods of abundance and fertility, celebrating the natural world and the gifts it provides. Their temples are large and open, integrated into the landscape, and their rituals focus on gratitude and connection to nature. However, as one ascends the pyramid, the focus shifts toward endurance and survival. The people in the mid-levels worship deities of strength and resilience, offering prayers for protection and the ability to withstand the growing hardships of life. At the apex, the religion is entirely different here. The belief is that the apex represents the peak of spiritual knowledge. The apex seekers follow a path of asceticism, believing that through physical hardship and meditation, they can transcend the physical world and connect with the divine. Their small, hidden temples are places of solitude, where seekers undergo spiritual trials in pursuit of enlightenment. As Assal stepped through the portal, she found herself plunged into a universe that was fundamentally different from anything she had ever experienced. The world around her didn't just stretch outward in familiar three-dimensional space. Instead, it folded, twisted, and expanded in ways that her mind struggled to comprehend. This was the Tesseract universe, a hypercube, a shape that existed not only in 3 dimensions but in 4. At first, the environment appeared normal. She stood on solid ground, the sky above her vast and open. But something was wrong. Assal took a step forward and felt an unsettling shift, as though the space around her had expanded and contracted at the same time. The world seemed to bend and fold in on itself in ways that defied the laws of Euclidean geometry. Here, dimensions overlapped, intertwined, and looped back on themselves, creating a landscape that was both familiar and utterly alien. She tried to focus on her surroundings, but her eyes couldn't make sense of what she saw. Buildings appeared to stretch into infinity, then suddenly fold into themselves, disappearing into dimensions she couldn't see. Pathways looped and twisted, leading nowhere and everywhere all at once. Time, too, seemed to behave strangely. Moments stretched out and collapsed simultaneously, and Assal couldn't tell if she had been here for seconds or hours. How do they live here? She whispered to herself, wondering how beings could possibly navigate such a world. Then, she saw them glimpses of beings moving through the Tesseract universe with ease. They were unlike anything she had ever imagined. Their bodies seemed to shimmer, flickering in and out of existence as they moved through dimensions she couldn't perceive. To Assal, it looked as though they were phasing in and out of reality, but for these beings, it was simply the natural way of moving through their world. At first, Assal tried to follow them, stepping cautiously along a pathway that seemed solid. But as she took another step, she felt the ground beneath her shift and fold. Suddenly, she found herself in a different part of the universe, with no memory of how she had arrived there. It was as if the very act of walking had transported her across dimensions, skipping through space and time in ways that were beyond her control. She looked up and saw one of the shimmering beings watching her. Its eyes, or what seemed to be eyes, glowed softly, and its body rippled with a strange, otherworldly light. The being extended a hand, and Assal felt a pull in her mind, as if it was trying to communicate with her not through words, but through thoughts, impressions, and feelings. "Don't resist," she heard in her mind. The voice was soft but commanding, and Assal felt herself relax slightly. She allowed the being's presence to enter her consciousness, and suddenly, the universe around her began to make more sense. She could feel the extra dimensions now, not just intellectually but intuitively. She could sense how the beings of this world moved through them, shifting effortlessly between spaces that overlapped and intersected in ways she had never imagined. "This is how we live," the being's voice echoed in her mind. "We do not move through space as you do. We move through all dimensions at once, folding and unfolding reality to suit our needs." Assal tried to imagine what that must feel like, to exist in more than 3 dimensions, to perceive and interact with a universe that folded and bent in on itself. The idea was dizzying, and for a moment, she felt as though her mind might collapse under the weight of it all. But the being seemed to sense her struggle and gently guided her thoughts, helping her to understand. "Time and space are not separate here," the being explained. "They are one. We move through time as easily as we move through space, shaping both to our will." Assal nodded slowly, though the concept was still difficult for her to grasp. "How do you live like this?" she asked aloud, though the words felt strange in her mouth. Speaking seemed almost unnecessary here, in a place where thoughts could be exchanged so easily. The being didn't respond with words but instead sent her an image, a vision of their world as they experienced it. In this vision, Assal saw the Tesseract universe as it truly was, a place where dimensions folded and unfolded, where beings could step through time and space as easily as walking across a room. She saw how these beings built their cities, not just in 3 dimensions, but in 4 or more. Their architecture extended into spaces that Assal couldn't perceive, and their lives were lived in ways that transcended her understanding of linear time. "They see everything at once," Assal realized. "The past, the present, and the future. It's all the same to them." For the beings of the Tesseract universe, existence was not bound by the limitations of time. They could move through their own history, shaping events as they saw fit. To them, life was a continuous flow, where past decisions and future possibilities existed side by side. Assal wondered what it must be like to live without the constraints of time, to see all of life laid out like a tapestry, with every moment connected to the others. But even as she marveled at the beauty of this existence, she sensed a darker truth. The beings of the Tesseract universe were not bound by time, but that meant they were also burdened by it. They could see all the possibilities, all the choices, and all the consequences of those choices. Every decision they made rippled through time and space, affecting not just their present but their entire existence. "Do you regret anything?" Assal asked, curious about the weight of such knowledge. The being hesitated, and for a moment, Assal felt a flicker of sadness. "Regret is a concept for those bound by time," the being said. "We do not regret. We experience all outcomes, all possibilities. But that knowledge can be overwhelming." Assal understood. In a world where all of time and space were visible at once, the beings of the Tesseract universe were both free and trapped. Free to shape their own destinies, but trapped by the knowledge of every possible consequence, every possible future. As she prepared to leave the Tesseract universe, Assal felt a deep sense of awe and respect for the beings who lived here. They had transcended the limitations of space and time, but they had also gained a burden that she could barely comprehend. Life in the Tesseract universe was a delicate balance between freedom and responsibility, and the beings who lived here navigated that balance with a grace that Assal could only admire. The being who had guided her through the experience sent one final thought before she left. You are bound by 3 dimensions, but your mind is not. Remember that, as you continue your journey. With those words echoing in her mind, Assal stepped back through the portal, leaving the Tesseract universe behind. She felt changed, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. Her understanding of time, space, and existence had been forever altered, and she knew that the next universe she visited would bring even more challenges. Chapter 7, The Tesseract Universe, Revisit, Climate, Nature, Civilization, and Religion. The Tesseract universe is a realm of multidimensional complexity, where time and space overlap and shift in unpredictable ways. The climate is fluid, changing rapidly depending on one's position within the universe's many layers. In some areas, the temperature is warm and stable, while in others, it shifts dramatically within moments. The natural world is dynamic. Plants, animals, and landscapes flicker in and out of visibility, existing simultaneously in multiple dimensions. It is a universe where perception constantly shifts, and what seems like solid ground may turn into open space the next moment. Nature in this universe has evolved to adapt to the multidimensional environment. Flora and fauna exist across several planes at once, stretching beyond the visible world. Plants may grow upward but also extend into different dimensions, their roots and branches disappearing into layers of space beyond comprehension. Animals have developed the ability to move through time as well as space, appearing and disappearing as they travel between dimensions. Civilization in the Tesseract universe is built around the manipulation of time and space. Cities are multidimensional, with structures that exist across several planes of reality simultaneously. Buildings seem to shift and change shape depending on the observer's perspective, making them impossible to navigate without advanced knowledge of the dimensional flow. The inhabitants have mastered the use of time and space, using technology that allows them to travel between dimensions and experience multiple moments in time all at once. Their society is built on the idea that reality is not fixed, but fluid, and they have learned to live within this shifting landscape with grace and precision. Religion in the Tesseract universe reflects the fluid nature of reality. The inhabitants worship deities they believe exist beyond time and space, known as the Eternal Ones. These gods are thought to govern the flow of dimensions, controlling the balance between past, present, and future. Temples in this universe are multidimensional structures, existing in different times and spaces depending on the viewer's perception. Worship involves rituals designed to align the followers with the shifting dimensions, allowing them to experience moments of clarity where they can glimpse the true nature of the universe. The ultimate goal of their faith is to achieve enlightenment by transcending the limitations of linear time and space, becoming one with the infinite flow of existence. When Assal stepped through the portal into the Mobius universe, she immediately felt disoriented. The ground beneath her feet was solid, but as she looked around, she realized that something was very wrong. The horizon seemed to twist and fold in on itself, creating a landscape that defied all logic. No matter where she looked, there were no clear boundaries, no familiar sense of direction. The world before her stretched out in a continuous loop, twisting in on itself like a ribbon. The Mobius strip. Assal had seen it before in drawings and mathematical models back in her own universe. A surface with only one side and one edge, a paradoxical shape that defied the usual rules of geometry. But here, in this universe, it wasn't just a theoretical concept, it was reality. She took a step forward and immediately felt the strange effects of the Mobius strip. As she walked, she realized that the path ahead didn't take her forward in the way she expected. Instead, it looped back on itself, twisting in ways that her mind struggled to comprehend. It felt as though every step she took led her in a circle, yet she never retraced her steps. This doesn't make sense, she muttered, stopping to catch her breath. But in this universe, sense wasn't a reliable guide. Here, space was bent, twisted, and folded in ways that defied logic. Assal continued to walk, carefully observing her surroundings. The landscape seemed to shift with each step. At times, the world appeared flat, but the further she walked, the more the ground seemed to twist beneath her feet, until she was walking upside down without realizing when the shift had happened. There was no clear up or down, here just an endless cycle of motion. She suddenly felt the eerie sensation that she had been here before, though she knew she hadn't. The path seemed familiar, yet she couldn't tell if she was retracing her steps or heading somewhere new. The Mobius universe played tricks on her perception, blurring the lines between past, present, and future, until everything felt like it was happening all at once. As she continued her journey, Assal began to understand that this universe was different from any she had visited before. It wasn't just the geometry that was strange, the very concept of time and movement had been altered. In this world, progress wasn't linear. No matter how far she walked, she found herself returning to the same point, over and over again. Frustration gnawed at her. How do they live here? She wondered aloud, imagining the beings who must inhabit this looping world. Then, she saw them, shadowy figures in the distance, moving in patterns that seemed random at first, but upon closer inspection, were part of the same continuous loop that governed this universe. They moved with purpose, yet Assal could see that their paths, like hers, led them back to where they started. The beings here had adapted to this strange reality, their movements fluid and graceful, as though they had long since accepted the cyclical nature of their world. One of the beings noticed her and began to approach, its form shifting slightly as it moved through the twisted space. As it drew closer, Assal could see that it was humanoid in shape, but its body seemed to ripple and twist, as though it were constantly folding in on itself, just like the universe it inhabited. "Welcome," the being said, though its voice seemed to echo from all directions at once. "You are lost, as all newcomers are." Assal nodded slowly. "How do you live here?" she asked, struggling to understand how anyone could navigate a world where movement seemed meaningless. The being smiled faintly, a ripple passing through its form. "We do not live as you understand it. We exist in the cycle, in the loop. There is no beginning or end here, only the journey." Assal frowned. "But doesn't that get frustrating, to never reach a destination?" The being tilted its head. "There is no frustration when there is no expectation of progress. We have learned to find meaning in the loop, in the patterns that emerge over time." The words puzzled Assal. In her world, progress and direction were everything. Life was about moving forward, striving toward a goal. But here, those concepts were irrelevant. The beings of the Mobius universe had adapted to their world's endless cycles, finding purpose not in reaching a destination but in the act of movement itself. As she continued to speak with the being, Assal began to understand their perspective. To them, the loop wasn't a trap, it was a way of life. They had learned to embrace the circular nature of their world, finding beauty in repetition, in the patterns that emerged from their continuous journeys. Time and space were not linear here, and so their lives were not bound by the need to move forward. Assal tried to imagine living in such a world. Could she, too, find peace in an existence without forward motion? It was hard to say, but she could see how the beings here had developed a kind of serenity, an acceptance of the cycle that governed their lives. The being gestured to the landscape around them, its form shifting slightly as it moved. "In your world, you seek progress, always moving forward. Here, we have learned that the loop is infinite, but within that infinity, there is freedom." Assal nodded, though she wasn't sure she fully understood. The Mobius universe was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It defied her need for direction, her desire to reach an endpoint. And yet, there was a strange beauty to it, a sense of peace in the endless cycle. As she prepared to leave, Assal felt a sense of respect for the beings who lived here. They had found a way to thrive in a universe where space folded back on itself, where movement was an illusion. They had learned to embrace the loop, to find purpose not in the destination but in the journey. Before she stepped back through the portal, the being left her with a final thought, its voice echoing softly in her mind. "In your world, you may think you are always moving forward, but remember life, too, is a cycle. Perhaps you will find peace in that, as we have." With those words lingering in her thoughts, Assal stepped through the portal, leaving the Mobius universe behind. The experience had left her with more questions than answers, but it had also given her a new perspective. In a world where progress seems so important, maybe there was value in simply embracing the journey, wherever it led. Chapter 8: The Toroidal Universe. Climate, Nature, Civilization, and Religion. The toroidal universe is a vast, donut-shaped world where gravity pulls inward, creating looping pathways that affect every aspect of the environment. The climate here is cyclical, with weather patterns that shift along the curvature of the torus. Regions closer to the inner ring experience cooler, calmer climates with light breezes and stable weather, while the outer ring is warmer and more turbulent, with strong winds and frequent storms caused by the gravitational shifts. The air is rich and full of energy, constantly moving in spirals along the torus. Nature in the toroidal universe has adapted to the curved landscape. Rivers and lakes follow the looping paths of gravity, spiraling through valleys and mountains in continuous circuits. Trees and plants grow in curved patterns, bending to follow the toroidal shape. Wildlife in this world has evolved to navigate the circular environment, with many species capable of using the gravitational loops to move quickly through the landscape. Animals here are agile, their bodies streamlined to move easily through the curved space. Civilization in the toroidal universe revolves around the mastery of gravity. The people of this universe have built cities that cling to the curved edges of the torus, using advanced technology to harness the gravitational loops for transportation, energy, and communication. Their buildings spiral upward, designed to move with the shifting forces of the torus, and their transportation systems allow them to travel vast distances along the curvature in a matter of moments. Society is focused on fluidity and movement, with an emphasis on adaptability and understanding the flow of gravity. Religiously, the people of the toroidal universe believe in the concept of the Great Loop, a divine force that governs the flow of energy and gravity throughout their world. They see the torus as a sacred symbol of infinity, where all things eventually return to their starting point. Their deities are represented as beings who control the looping pathways of life and the universe, and their temples are built at key points along the gravitational loops, where the pull is strongest. Worship involves meditative journeys along the loops, where followers seek to align themselves with the flow of gravity and achieve a state of balance and unity with the universe. The ultimate goal of their religion is to achieve enlightenment by understanding the cyclical nature of existence and learning to move in harmony with the loops that define their world. The portal opened once again, and Assal found herself stepping into a world that felt strangely familiar yet distinctly alien. The air was thick with energy, and as she looked around, she realized she was standing on the surface of a world shaped like a giant torus, a massive, donut-shaped universe where gravity pulled inward, creating loops and curves in space that defied the straight lines she had grown accustomed to. She looked up and saw something extraordinary. The universe curved back on itself, the horizon looping around and meeting itself far in the distance. This world had no real up or down. Instead, the curvature of the torus meant that every direction eventually led back to the same point. It was as though she was standing inside a colossal ring, and no matter which way she walked, she would eventually circle back to where she had started. Assal took a cautious step forward. The ground beneath her felt solid, but there was something off about the way gravity worked here. Instead of pulling her straight down, it seemed to tug at her from multiple directions. The curvature of space affected not just her sense of direction but her sense of weight and balance. With each step, she felt lighter, as though gravity was less intense than in the other universes she had visited. As she walked, she noticed that the landscape around her was divided into distinct regions. Some areas were lush and fertile, teeming with strange plant life that seemed to grow in spirals and loops, following the curvature of the torus. Other regions were barren and rocky, with jagged cliffs and deep chasms that seemed to twist inward, as if the universe itself was folding in on itself. She soon encountered a group of beings, their forms sleek and elongated, perfectly adapted to the toroidal world. Their bodies seemed to follow the curves of the universe, and their movements were fluid and graceful, as though they were in tune with the bending space around them. They moved in intricate patterns, weaving through the landscape with ease, their paths looping and twisting in ways that made Assal's head spin. One of the beings approached her, its eyes glowing with an ethereal light. It spoke, though its voice seemed to echo not just from its mouth, but from the very space around her, as though the universe itself was speaking. "Welcome to the loop," the being said, its voice soft but resonant. "You are not from here. I can feel the straightness in your mind, the need for linear paths." Assal nodded, feeling slightly out of place. "It's true. I come from a world where space and time move in straight lines. But here, everything seems to curve." The being tilted its head, as though considering her words. "Straight lines are illusions in this world. Here, everything bends. The loops of space and time are infinite, and we have learned to move with them." Assal watched as the being moved its hands in a graceful arc, manipulating the space around it. The very air seemed to ripple in response, as though the being was bending reality to its will. "How do you do that?" Assal asked, marveling at the being's control over its environment. The being smiled. "We have learned to harness the curvature of the torus. Gravity here does not pull in one direction, it moves in cycles, loops, spirals. Once you understand the flow of space, you can move with it, using the loops to travel great distances without ever leaving the ground." Assal tried to imagine what it must be like to live in such a world. In her universe, movement was simple: forward, backward, up, down. But here, nothing was that straightforward. Every step followed the curvature of the torus, looping back on itself. To move forward in a straight line was impossible. Instead, the beings of this universe had learned to use the loops to their advantage, manipulating space to move in ways that defied logic. As the being guided her through the landscape, Assal began to notice the intricate patterns that governed the toroidal universe. Rivers flowed in loops, their waters never truly reaching an end. Mountains curved and twisted, their peaks meeting the ground in strange, circular formations. Even the sky above seemed to follow the same pattern, with stars and planets orbiting in complex, looping paths that defied her understanding of celestial mechanics. "How do you travel?" Assal asked as they walked, noticing that despite the looping space, the beings seemed to move effortlessly. The being gestured toward the horizon, where a large, spiral-shaped structure loomed in the distance. "We build our cities in the loops, using the natural curvature of the torus to transport us. We do not walk as you do, we ride the flow of space, allowing the loops to carry us from one place to another." As they approached the structure, Assal realized that it wasn't just a city, it was a living organism, its walls and towers made of organic material that pulsed with energy. The city itself seemed to move in sync with the loops of the toroidal universe, its pathways twisting and curving in ways that made no sense to her. The being led her inside, where she saw more of its kind, moving in complex patterns, their bodies seemingly weightless as they followed the loops of space. The city was alive with energy, and Assal could feel the gravitational forces shifting and bending around her as she walked. It was disorienting at first, but slowly, she began to understand how the beings moved. They weren't fighting against the loops, they were part of them. As they reached the center of the city, the being turned to her, its expression calm and serene. "In this world, we do not resist the flow of space. We have learned to live with it, to become part of the loop. There is no destination, no beginning, and no end. There is only the cycle, the infinite return." Assal thought back to the Mobius universe, where the beings had found peace in the endless loop. Here, too, the beings of the toroidal universe seemed to accept the cyclical nature of their world, but there was a key difference. While the Mobius universe was a single, continuous loop, the toroidal universe was made of many loops, all interconnected, creating a complex web of pathways. "How do you make decisions?" Assal asked, curious about how these beings navigated life in a world where every path led back to the beginning. The being smiled again. We do not choose a single path. We explore all paths. In a universe of loops, every choice leads to another, and every outcome is part of the same cycle. There is no right or wrong way, only different experiences. Assal pondered this as they walked back toward the city's entrance. In a universe where space and time were constantly bending, where every path eventually led back to the same point, the beings had developed a unique philosophy. They didn't see life as a series of linear choices, but rather as a web of interconnected experiences, all of which had value. Each path was simply another loop in the infinite cycle of existence. As they approached the outskirts of the city, Assal saw other beings gliding effortlessly along the curves of space, their movements smooth and fluid. They moved not by walking, but by bending the gravitational loops around them, almost as if they were surfing the currents of space itself. It was beautiful, and in that moment, Assal realized something profound. The beings of the toroidal universe had mastered the art of living in harmony with their world's unique geometry. They didn't fight against the loops or try to control them, they embraced them. "Would you like to try?" the being asked, sensing Assal's fascination. Assal hesitated for a moment, unsure if she could manage the intricate skill of bending space to her will. But her curiosity outweighed her uncertainty. "Yes," she said finally. The being extended its hand, and Assal took it. Immediately, she felt a strange sensation, a subtle shift in the space around her, as if the very air had become a living, dynamic force. The being guided her, gently at first, teaching her how to feel the gravitational loops that flowed through the torus. "Don't think in straight lines," the being said softly, its voice resonating with the rhythms of the universe. "Feel the curve. Let it guide you." Assal closed her eyes and focused. She could sense the loops now, the subtle currents of space bending and twisting around her. She felt the pull of gravity not as a single force, but as a fluid motion that moved in spirals. Slowly, she lifted her foot and took a step not forward, but with the flow of the loop. To her astonishment, she moved effortlessly, as though the space around her had lifted her up. She wasn't walking in the traditional sense. She was gliding, carried along by the bending of space. It was exhilarating, the sensation of weightlessness and freedom. For the first time since arriving in this universe, she felt at peace with its strange geometry. The being smiled, sensing her joy. "Now you understand. We do not move against the flow, we are part of it." Assal spent the next several hours exploring the toroidal universe in this new way. She let the loops of space carry her, moving in graceful spirals through the landscape. She visited different regions, each one shaped by the unique gravitational forces of the torus. Some regions were dense and heavy, where the loops pulled inward and gravity intensified. Others were light and airy, where the loops expanded outward, creating vast, open spaces. As she traveled, she met other beings, each one moving with the same fluid grace, bending the loops of space to suit their needs. They welcomed her with curiosity, fascinated by her presence as an outsider from a world of straight lines. To them, the idea of linear paths and one-directional movement was as foreign as the concept of loops had been to Assal. By the time she returned to the city, Assal felt as though she had gained a new understanding of the universe, not just this one, but all of them. The toroidal beings had taught her something fundamental, that the shape of the universe shapes not only its inhabitants, but also their understanding of existence itself. As the sun, or whatever passed for a sun in this universe, began to set, casting long shadows across the curved landscape, Assal stood at the edge of the city, looking out at the infinite loops of space before her. She felt a sense of peace, knowing that in this universe, there was no need to rush, no need to reach a destination. Life here was a cycle, a continuous flow of experience, and every loop was part of the whole. "Thank you," Assal said to the being who had guided her. The being bowed its head slightly. "You are always welcome in the loop," it said, its voice warm and kind. "Remember, the flow of space and time is not something to fight. It is something to embrace. With those words echoing in her mind, Assal turned toward the portal, ready to continue her journey. As she stepped through, leaving the toroidal universe behind, she carried with her the lessons of the loop, a reminder that in the vast, infinite cosmos, there are many ways to move, to live, and to understand the world around us. Chapter 9, The Cuboid Universe, Revisit, Climate, Nature, Civilization, and Religion. The cuboid universe is a structured and angular world, where gravity behaves differently along the length, width, and height of the universe. The climate in this universe is varied depending on where one stands in relation to the cuboid's geometry. On the long faces, the climate is temperate and stable, with seasons that change gradually, supporting a rich variety of plant and animal life. Here, vast plains, forests, and rivers stretch out in straight lines, offering fertile ground for civilizations to thrive. However, near the edges and corners of the cuboid, the climate becomes more extreme. The gravitational forces pull harder, causing violent winds, unpredictable weather, and unstable environments. The corners, where the forces are most concentrated, are nearly barren, with jagged rock formations and harsh, cold winds. Few forms of life exist in these regions, as only the toughest and most adaptable species can survive the crushing gravity and hostile conditions. Civilization in the cuboid universe reflects the geometry of the world. On the long, stable faces, society is peaceful and organized, with cities that are built along perfectly straight lines. The inhabitants here value balance and symmetry, reflected in their art, architecture, and social structure. Life is focused on intellectual pursuits, with an emphasis on philosophy, mathematics, and science. Near the edges and corners, civilization is more rugged. The people who live in these extreme regions are resilient and resourceful, building fortresses that can withstand the powerful gravitational forces. Their society is focused on survival, with advanced technology designed to manipulate gravity and protect them from the harsh environment. The inhabitants of these regions are proud of their strength and endurance, viewing their ability to live in such a challenging world as a sign of their superiority. Religion in the cuboid universe is divided according to the different regions. On the stable faces, the people worship gods of order and precision, known as the architects, who are believed to have shaped the universe according to perfect geometric principles. Their temples are built with exacting symmetry, and their rituals involve mathematical calculations and meditations on the nature of balance and structure. In the edges and corners, however, the people follow a more primal faith, worshipping gods of strength and endurance, known as the cornerstones. These deities are seen as the embodiments of the raw, powerful forces that govern the cuboid's extreme regions. Their temples are small, fortified structures, built to withstand the elements, and their religious practices involve feats of strength and endurance, through which they seek to prove their worthiness to the gods. The ultimate goal of their faith is to gain favor from the deities by surviving the harshest conditions and mastering the powerful forces of the cuboid. Assal stepped through the portal into a universe that felt strange, not because of its immediate appearance, but because of the way it pressed down on her. The sky was clear, the landscape stretched before her like a vast plain, but something was off. Gravity. It was pulling her downward, as expected, but not in a uniform way. The force seemed to fluctuate, heavier in some places, lighter in others depending on the direction she moved. This was the cuboid universe, and the rules here were different. The world around her was shaped like a massive rectangular prism, its boundaries extending out in sharp angles rather than gentle curves. She could see the distant edges of the universe, where the walls of the cuboid met at perfect 90-degree angles, but no matter how far she walked, it seemed that the gravity shifted subtly, pulling her either downward or sideways, depending on the direction. Assal began to walk forward, feeling the change in gravity as she moved. The further she ventured along the length of the cuboid, the lighter her body felt, as though gravity was stretching itself thin across the expanse. But when she turned to walk in the other direction, Along the shorter dimension, the gravity intensified, weighing her down with each step. Everything is different here, she whispered to herself, marveling at how the simple shape of the cuboid affected the very forces of nature. As she continued to explore, she noticed the inhabitants of this universe. The beings were tall and elongated, their bodies adapted to the lighter gravity that dominated most of the cuboid's length. They moved gracefully across the landscape, their long limbs allowing them to cover great distances with ease. But as Assal watched, she saw something even more curious. There were other beings, much shorter and more compact, living closer to the edges of the cuboid where gravity was heavier. It seemed that the beings of this universe had evolved in two distinct ways, depending on which part of the cuboid they inhabited. Those who lived in the lighter gravitational zones had evolved to be tall and slender, while those in the heavy gravitational zones had become shorter, denser, and more robust, their bodies built to withstand the immense weight of the intense gravity near the edges. Assal approached a group of the taller beings, who moved through the air with an almost floating grace. One of them noticed her and glided toward her, its elongated body swaying slightly in the light gravitational pull. Its voice was gentle, almost ethereal, and it greeted her with a nod. "You are not from here," the being said, its voice carrying on the light breeze. "You carry the weight of a universe with uniform gravity." Assal nodded, intrigued by the being's ability to sense her origins. "Yes, I come from a world where gravity pulls the same in every direction. But here, it's different. Why does gravity change?" The being smiled, a soft expression that seemed almost timeless. "In this universe, gravity flows along the dimensions of the cuboid. The longer the dimension, the lighter the pull. The shorter the dimension, the heavier. Our bodies have adapted to these changes. We are of the light, moving with the flow of space, while others," the being gestured toward the shorter, more robust figures in the distance, "have adapted to the heavier pull near the edges." Assal watched the beings in the heavier gravitational zones, marveling at their resilience. They moved slowly, carefully, their movements deliberate and calculated to conserve energy in the dense gravity. Their cities were built low to the ground, with thick walls and sturdy structures designed to withstand the immense forces that pressed down on them. "How do you interact with them?" Assal asked, curious about the relationship between the two groups. "We live in harmony," the being replied. "Though our bodies are different, we understand that each group has its place in this universe. The heavy dwellers build the structures that hold this world together. Their strength and resilience allow them to create the foundations of our civilization. We, the light ones, travel great distances, gathering knowledge and resources that are brought back to the heavy dwellers." Assal nodded, impressed by the balance between the two groups. It seemed that the cuboid universe had fostered a society based on mutual respect and cooperation, with each group contributing to the survival and advancement of their civilization in different ways. The being extended its hand, offering Assal a chance to experience their way of life. "Come," it said softly, "we will show you how we live with the flow of gravity." Assal took the being's hand, and immediately, she felt the shift in gravity again. The being led her across the landscape, moving effortlessly as though the lighter gravity carried them forward. The experience was surreal. Assal felt as though she was floating, her feet barely touching the ground. The taller beings had mastered the art of moving with gravity rather than against it, using the light pull to glide across vast distances in moments. As they traveled, Assal noticed that the cities of the taller beings were different from those of the heavy dwellers. Their structures were tall and elegant, built to rise into the sky rather than press into the ground. The buildings swayed slightly in the gentle gravitational pull, but they were sturdy, designed to move with the forces of the universe rather than resist them. "How do you manage the changes in gravity?" Assal asked, as they passed a particularly tall tower that seemed to bend and curve with the wind. "We build with the flow in mind," the being explained. "Our structures are flexible, designed to move with the gravity rather than fight it. We have learned that to survive in this universe, we must adapt to its shape, just as we have adapted our bodies. Assal thought about the adaptability of the beings in this universe. Their civilization had developed not by imposing their will on the environment, but by working with it, shaping their technology and architecture to fit the unique properties of the cuboid world. The taller beings had embraced the lightness of the long dimension, while the heavy dwellers had embraced the strength of the shorter, more intense gravitational zones. After spending time with the tall beings, Assal expressed her desire to visit the heavy dwellers as well. The being smiled and led her toward the edge of the cuboid, where gravity grew heavier with every step. As they approached, Assal felt the weight pressing down on her more intensely, and by the time they reached the heavy dwellers, she could barely lift her feet. The heavy dwellers moved slowly but deliberately, their bodies compact and muscular, perfectly suited to the crushing gravity of the edges. They greeted Assal with quiet dignity, their voices deep and resonant, like the sound of rocks shifting under pressure. They lived in low-built cities, their architecture squat and dense, designed to withstand the intense gravitational forces that surrounded them. "We live where the universe's weight is greatest," one of the heavy dwellers explained, its voice like thunder. "Here, we build the foundations of our world. Without us, the tall ones could not rise. We create the support that allows them to float through the sky." Assal smiled, understanding the symbiotic relationship between the two groups. The cuboid universe had taught them the value of balance, of working together to survive and thrive in a world where gravity itself was constantly shifting. As she prepared to leave the cuboid universe, Assal felt a deep respect for the beings she had encountered. They had adapted to the unique geometry of their universe, not by fighting against it, but by embracing the differences that shaped their world. They had learned to live in harmony with the forces of gravity, creating a society that valued both strength and lightness, resilience and grace. With a final glance at the tall, swaying towers of the light beings and the sturdy, grounded cities of the heavy dwellers, Assal stepped back through the portal, ready for whatever came next in her journey. Chapter 10: The Mobius Universe, Revisit, Climate, Nature, Civilization, and Religion. The Mobius universe is a place where reality loops back on itself in a continuous, one-sided plane. The climate here follows the cyclical nature of the universe, with alternating periods of calm and turbulence that occur in repetitive loops. The seasons repeat endlessly, with the same weather patterns cycling at regular intervals. This gives the world a sense of predictability, where inhabitants can anticipate exactly when storms will hit or when the air will turn cool, knowing that every moment is bound to repeat. The landscape, too, reflects this cyclical nature, with rivers flowing in endless loops, mountains rising and falling along continuous, undulating curves, and forests regrowing in perfectly predictable cycles. The natural world of the Mobius universe is in sync with its environment, with plants and animals evolving to live in harmony with the repeated rhythms of existence. Animals move in precise, repetitive patterns, following the natural loops of the landscape, while plants grow in circular formations, flourishing in specific phases of the repeating seasons. The cyclical nature of life here makes the ecosystem stable, as all beings know that what has been will come again. Civilization in the Mobius universe mirrors the flow of time and space in this world. The cities are built in continuous loops, with streets, buildings, and infrastructure designed to follow the natural curves of the landscape. Society is deeply connected to the cycle, with daily life organized around the repeating patterns of time and space. The people here have a deep understanding of the repetitive nature of their universe, which has led to a focus on tradition, ritual, and order. Every action is performed with the knowledge that it will be repeated again in the future, and this shapes how they approach technology, culture, and governance. Religion in the Mobius universe is centered around the Great Loop, a belief system that views the cyclical nature of reality as the ultimate expression of divine will. The Mobius strip itself is considered sacred, representing the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. The people believe that time is not linear but a continuous loop, and their deities are seen as guardians of this eternal return. Their temples are designed in circular formations, with rituals focused on reinforcing the idea that every action and event will come again. Religious ceremonies involve reenacting the same rituals over and over, with the belief that by fully understanding and embracing the cycle, one can achieve spiritual enlightenment. The ultimate goal of their faith is to accept the endless loop of existence and find peace within it, knowing that life, like the universe itself, is bound to repeat. The familiar shimmer of the portal faded, and Assal once again found herself at the base of the colossal pyramid-shaped universe. This time, however, she wasn't focused on the physical challenge of climbing toward the apex. Instead, she was here to learn more about the people who lived in this stratified world, a society defined by its relationship with the ever-shifting forces of gravity and the unique conditions that shaped each layer of the pyramid. The base of the pyramid was lush and expansive, filled with greenery and abundant life. The gravity here was gentle, almost non-existent compared to what she knew from her own universe. The air was warm, and the sky above was vast and open, stretching upward toward the narrowing peak of the pyramid. Life here flourished, and as Assal walked among the people of the base, she could see that their culture reflected the comfort and ease of their environment. The beings at the base were tall and graceful, their movements slow and deliberate. They lived in wide, sprawling cities, with low-built structures that extended outward rather than upward. The architecture blended seamlessly with the landscape, using natural materials that grew abundantly in this fertile region. It was clear that the people of the base had little need for the complexities of advanced technology here. Nature provided for all their needs. Assal approached one of the inhabitants, a being with skin the color of deep, rich soil and eyes that gleamed like polished stone. The being smiled warmly as Assal neared and gestured for her to join a small gathering nearby. "Welcome, traveler," the being said, its voice soft and melodic. "You come from beyond the pyramid, yes?" Assal nodded. "Yes, I've come to understand how you live here. Your world is unique." The being chuckled lightly. "Unique, yes, but our lives are simple, peaceful. We are close to the earth, close to the source of life. The forces of the universe are gentle here, and we have learned to live in harmony with them." As they spoke, Assal learned that the people of the base lived in a society centered around community and harmony with nature. Their technology was minimal, as they had little need for tools or machines to manipulate their environment. Instead, they focused on art, music, and storytelling ways of expressing their connection to the natural world and to each other. "Do you ever go higher up the pyramid?" Assal asked, curious about the connection between the different layers of this world. The being shook its head. "No, the higher regions are not for us. The forces there are too strong, too harsh. We live here, in the comfort of the base, where life is easy. Those who live higher have a different way of life, one built on strength and endurance." As Assal continued to explore the base, she saw how the people here had built their lives around abundance and simplicity. They didn't need to struggle for survival or create complex technologies to navigate their world. Their existence was one of harmony with the land, where each day passed in gentle rhythms, much like the slow pull of gravity around them. But Assal's journey didn't end at the base. She knew that the true test of this world lay in the higher regions, where gravity intensified and life became more difficult. With a sense of purpose, she began her ascent once more, moving toward the middle layers of the pyramid. The middle layers. As Assal climbed higher, the gentle pull of gravity began to change. The air grew cooler, and the landscape became more rugged, with rocky outcroppings replacing the fertile plains below. Here, in the middle regions of the pyramid, life was different. The people were stronger, more resilient, their bodies adapted to the increased gravitational forces that pressed down on them. The cities in the middle layers were built into the mountainsides, their architecture rugged and functional. Unlike the sprawling, open designs of the base, the buildings here were more vertical, designed to withstand the stronger gravitational forces that pulled everything downward. Towers rose into the sky, supported by thick walls and foundations that could handle the weight of the universe's pull. The people of the middle layers were industrious, their society built around hard work and endurance. Assal saw them constructing large machines, forging tools, and building intricate systems of transportation that allowed them to move materials and goods through the challenging terrain. They had developed advanced technologies to manipulate gravity, using it to power their machines and transport systems. Assal marveled at their ingenuity. "You found a way to use the gravity here to your advantage," she said to one of the inhabitants, a broad-shouldered figure with powerful limbs and a determined expression. The figure nodded, a proud smile on their face. "We have too. Life here is harder than at the base, but we thrive on that challenge. The gravity gives us strength, and we've learned to harness it for our benefit." The people of the middle layers had created a society that valued innovation and resilience. They worked together to overcome the harsh conditions, developing technologies that allowed them to survive and thrive in a world where the forces of the universe were constantly pressing down on them. Their culture was one of strength and perseverance, built on the belief that through hard work and ingenuity, they could master the forces of their world. As Assal continued her journey upward, she felt a deep respect for the people of the middle layers. They had adapted to their environment, using the very forces that challenged them as tools for their survival. Their technology was advanced, but it was also grounded in their connection to the natural world. They didn't fight against gravity, but rather used it to shape their society. The apex. Assal pressed on, climbing higher still toward the apex of the pyramid. As she neared the top, the gravity became almost unbearable. Every step felt like a monumental effort, and the air was thin and cold. The landscape was barren, devoid of life, save for a few hardy plants that clung to the rocky ground. The people here were few, but they were unlike any she had seen before. Their bodies were compact, built for endurance, their faces hardened by the extreme conditions. These were the survivors, the ones who had chosen to live in the most hostile environment of the pyramid. They lived in small, fortified settlements, their homes built into the rocks to protect them from the crushing forces that pressed down from above. When Assal spoke to them, she could sense their pride. They lived at the apex not because they had to, but because they had chosen to. For them, the apex represented the ultimate test of strength and endurance. Life here was a constant struggle, but it was also a path to enlightenment, a way of pushing beyond the limits of the physical world. "We live where the forces are strongest," one of the apex dwellers explained, their voice low and steady. "Here, we are closest to the universe's core, to the point where gravity itself bends and warps. It is a hard life, but it gives us clarity, a deeper understanding of the forces that shape all things." Assal felt a sense of awe as she stood at the apex, the weight of the universe pressing down on her. The people here had chosen to live in a place where few could survive, driven by a desire for something greater than comfort or ease. They had found meaning in the struggle, and in doing so, had forged a deep connection to the very forces that shaped their world. As she prepared to leave the pyramidal universe, Assal reflected on the lessons she had learned. Each layer of the pyramid represented a different way of life, shaped by the forces of gravity and environment. From the peaceful, harmonious existence of the base dwellers to the industrious, resilient middle layers, to the hardened survivors at the apex, the people of this world had each found their place in the grand design of the universe. And in doing so, they had shown Assal that life, no matter where it is found, always adapts to the forces that shape it. Chapter 11. The Square Pyramid Universe. Climate, Nature, Civilization, and Religion. The Square Pyramid Universe is a world of stratification, where both climate and society become more extreme as one ascends toward the apex. At the base of the pyramid, the climate is mild and welcoming, with a balanced distribution of sunlight, rainfall, and fertile soil. The lower levels are lush and green, with dense forests, expansive plains, and thriving ecosystems. Moving upward toward the mid-levels, the temperature drops, the air becomes thinner, and the landscape becomes harsher. The mid-level regions are marked by rocky terrain, sparse vegetation, and increasing gravitational pressure. At the apex, the climate is severe cold, barren, and wind-blasted, with gravity so intense that only the hardiest forms of life can survive. The apex itself is a place of solitude, where few dare to live. Civilization in the square pyramid universe is closely tied to the stratified nature of the environment. At the base, society is prosperous and peaceful, with large cities built in harmony with the natural environment. The people here enjoy a life of abundance, focusing on community, agriculture, and culture. The mid-levels are more industrious, with a population that is hardened by the harsher conditions. Cities are built into the rock, and society here revolves around innovation, engineering, and trade. The apex is home to only a few, the spiritual elite, who believe that enduring the harsh conditions near the top brings them closer to divine truth. These individuals live in small, isolated communities, devoting their lives to meditation and contemplation. Religion in the square pyramid universe is deeply influenced by the physical journey from the base to the apex. At the base, the people worship gods of fertility, prosperity, and growth, believing that the abundance of nature is a divine gift. Their temples are large and open, often surrounded by gardens, and their rituals focus on celebrating life and abundance. As one moves higher, religious beliefs shift. In the mid-levels, the people worship deities of strength, endurance, and perseverance, believing that the hardships they face are tests of their character. Their temples are built into the rock, designed to withstand the harsh environment, and their rituals involve acts of endurance and survival. At the apex, religion takes on a more mystical form. The spiritual elite, known as the enlightened ones, believe that the apex represents the ultimate challenge, a place where gravity, isolation, and hardship force individuals to confront the essence of existence. They follow a path of asceticism, believing that by enduring physical hardship and meditating on the forces of the universe, they can attain enlightenment. Their temples are small, simple shrines, where they seek to connect with the divine by pushing the limits of their physical and spiritual endurance. Assal stepped through the portal and emerged into a world that felt vast yet contained, its towering structure immediately imposing. This universe was shaped like a massive square pyramid, with four wide, angular faces converging toward a sharp, distant apex high above. The air here was thick with energy, a subtle hum that resonated through the ground beneath her feet. Assal could feel the pull of gravity already, though it was mild at the base. She knew, however, that it would only grow stronger as she climbed higher. This universe, she quickly realized, wasn't just defined by its physical shape. The entire society here was stratified based on one's position on the pyramid. The lower levels were wide and sprawling, home to the majority of the population, while the upper layers were more exclusive, occupied by the powerful, the enlightened, and the few who could survive the intense gravitational forces near the apex. As she made her way through the lower regions, Assal saw a vibrant, bustling world filled with life. The cities here were large and well organized, their streets wide and busy, teeming with people who moved with purpose and energy. The architecture was grand and monumental, with towering buildings that mimicked the structure of the pyramid itself, large at the base, narrowing as they rose into the sky. Everything here was built to reflect the hierarchy of the universe, with each level of society aspiring to move upward, closer to the peak. The people of the base were strong and sturdy, their bodies adapted to the gravity, which was heavier than what Assal was used to but manageable for those who lived here. They were industrious, working in trades that supported the entire pyramid, producing food, building materials, and technology that allowed the higher levels to thrive. There was a sense of community here, a shared understanding that their place at the base was vital to the function of the entire world. Assal spoke to one of the base dwellers, a broad-shouldered woman with dark eyes and a firm, calloused grip. "Do you ever wish to live higher up the pyramid?" Assal asked, curious about how the people here viewed the stratification of their world. The woman shook her head with a knowing smile. "The higher you go, the harder life becomes. We live here, at the base, because we are the foundation. Without us, the upper levels would crumble. And besides, she added, with a shrug, up there, the gravity is crushing. Only a few can survive it. Assal nodded, understanding the woman's perspective. Life at the base, while demanding, was stable and secure. The people here had no desire to ascend the pyramid, knowing that the higher they climbed, the more dangerous it would become. But Assal's curiosity drove her to explore further. She began her ascent, leaving the bustling cities of the base behind as she climbed toward the middle layers of the pyramid. The path grew steeper, and the air became thinner, the gravitational pull more pronounced with each step. The middle layers. In the middle layers of the square pyramid, Assal encountered a different kind of society. The people here were leaner and more focused, their bodies and minds sharpened by the increasing difficulty of life at this altitude. The cities in the middle layers were smaller, more tightly packed, and far less crowded than those at the base. Here, the architecture was sleek and efficient, designed to withstand the growing gravitational forces. The people of the middle layers were ambitious, driven by a desire to ascend higher. They viewed their position on the pyramid as a stepping stone, a place of preparation for the challenges that lay ahead. They were scholars, engineers, and innovators, constantly pushing the boundaries of technology and knowledge in their quest to rise closer to the apex. Assal stopped at a small marketplace, where merchants traded not just goods but ideas. She spoke with a young scholar, his eyes bright with curiosity and ambition. "We study the forces of the pyramid," he explained eagerly, "learning how to manipulate gravity, how to build stronger materials that can withstand the crushing weight of the higher levels." "Is it dangerous to go higher?" Assal asked, already feeling the strain of the increased gravity. The scholar nodded, his expression serious. "Very dangerous. Few survive beyond the upper middle layers. The gravity becomes almost unbearable. But those who do ascend, they gain wisdom, knowledge beyond anything we can comprehend. It's said that at the apex, reality itself bends, and time flows differently." Assal could see the mix of awe and fear in the scholar's eyes. For the people here, the apex wasn't just a physical destination, it was a place of spiritual enlightenment, a goal that represented the highest form of understanding and power. But the journey was perilous, and most chose to remain in the relative safety of the middle layers, content with the progress they had made. The technology in this region reflected the challenges of life here. Buildings were reinforced with advanced materials, designed to withstand the gravitational forces that increased with every step upward. People used personal gravity belts to help offset the weight, allowing them to move more freely and safely. But even with these advancements, Assal could feel the strain. Every step she took toward the higher layers felt heavier, her body working harder to adapt to the growing pressure. The upper layers and the apex. Assal continued her climb, pushing herself toward the upper levels of the pyramid. The path grew steeper, the air colder and thinner, and the weight of gravity more oppressive. She could feel her muscles ache, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The cities here were sparse, small clusters of buildings that clung to the rock face like determined survivors. The people of the upper layers were few and far between, but those who lived here were different. They had transcended the physical limitations of their world. Their bodies adapted not just to survive, but to thrive in the intense gravitational pull. These people were the apex seekers, the ones who had devoted their lives to reaching the top of the pyramid, believing that the closer they got to the apex, the closer they came to understanding the true nature of the universe. Assal met one of these apex seekers, a wiry, gray-haired figure with a calm, meditative presence. "You've come far," the seeker said, their voice low and steady, despite the crushing pressure that weighed down on them. "Few make it this high. What is at the apex?" Assal asked, her curiosity piqued by the air of reverence in the seeker's tone. The seeker smiled, a faint, mysterious expression. "The apex is not just a place. It is the point where all forces converge, where gravity becomes infinite, and time itself warp and bends to the will of the universe. At the apex, reality as you know it begins to unravel, and those who reach it are said to gain insights that transcend the physical world. But such knowledge comes at a cost. Assal shivered, not from the cold, but from the weight of the seeker's words. She had felt the increasing strain of gravity with every step, but she now understood that this journey was more than just physical. Reaching the apex was a test of willpower, endurance, and spirit. The seeker gestured toward the narrow path that led further upward. Many have tried to reach the apex, but only a few have succeeded. Some say that at the top, you lose your sense of self, becoming one with the forces that shape the universe. Others say that time becomes fluid, allowing you to see past, present, and future all at once. Have you been there? Assal asked, studying the seeker's calm demeanor. The seeker's smile faded slightly. I have come close, but I have never reached it. The apex is not for everyone. Some are meant to climb, while others are meant to observe. My path lies here, in guiding those who seek to go higher. Assal felt a pull, deep inside her, urging her to continue. The journey to the apex had become more than just a physical ascent. It was a metaphor for discovery, for pushing the boundaries of understanding. But she could also feel the pressure, the weight of the pyramid bearing down on her with every step. Was she ready to confront what lay at the top? Be careful, the seeker warned. The apex changes you. It's not just the gravity, it's the realization of how small we are in the grand design of the universe. Some who reach the apex never return, their minds lost in the infinite forces they encounter. Assal nodded, feeling the gravity of the decision ahead of her both literally and figuratively. She thanked the seeker and continued her journey upward, each step becoming more difficult than the last. The final ascent. The climb to the apex was the hardest thing Assal had ever experienced. The air was so thin that every breath burned in her lungs, and the gravity was so intense that her muscles screamed in agony. The path narrowed to a single, rocky trail, winding its way up the final stretch of the pyramid. Above her, the apex loomed, sharp and distant, like a point where the universe folded in on itself. As she neared the top, Assal began to feel strange. Time seemed to slow, her steps dragging out as if each second lasted an eternity. The landscape around her warped, the sharp lines of the pyramid twisting and bending as if they were made of liquid. She glanced at her hands and saw them flicker, appearing both in front of her and behind her at the same time. It was as if reality was coming undone, unraveling the closer she got to the apex. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she reached the top. The apex was a point of pure energy, a singularity where all the forces of the universe seemed to converge. The gravity was so intense that Assal could barely stand, but it wasn't just the physical pressure that weighed on her, it was the overwhelming sense of knowledge, of understanding, that poured into her mind. She could see the universe in its entirety, not just this one, but the others she had visited, all connected by invisible threads of energy and time. She could feel time flowing around her, not as a straight line, but as a river, branching out into infinite possibilities. Past, present, and future were all visible at once, each moment overlapping with the next. She saw her own life, every choice she had made, every path she could have taken, all laid out before her like a vast, intricate tapestry. But it was more than just her own life. She could see the lives of the people in the pyramid, the beings in the other universes she had visited, all connected by the same cosmic forces that shaped their worlds. She saw civilizations rise and fall, stars born and dying, galaxies spinning through the endless expanse of space. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, it was over. Assal staggered back, her mind reeling from the flood of information. The apex was a place of infinite knowledge, but it was also a place of infinite weight. The more she understood, the heavier it became, until the gravity of it all threatened to crush her under its sheer force. She took a deep breath, focusing on the present moment. Slowly, the world around her began to stabilize, the warped landscape returning to its familiar pyramid shape. The gravity remained intense, but her mind was clear once again. With one final look at the apex, Assal began her descent. The journey back down was slower, more reflective. She had seen the universe from the highest point, had glimpsed its inner workings, and now she carried that knowledge with her. But she also understood why so few made it to the top, because the apex was not just a place of answers, but of questions, questions that weighed heavy on the soul. As she reached the middle layers once again, she found the seeker waiting for her. "You reached the apex," the seeker said softly, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. Assal nodded, her expression somber. "Yes, but it's not what I expected." "It never is," the seeker replied with a knowing smile. "But now you understand. The apex changes you, but it doesn't give you all the answers. It only shows you the vastness of what you don't know." Assal smiled faintly, understanding the truth in the seeker's words. She had seen the universe from the top of the pyramid, but it hadn't given her closure. It had opened her mind to the infinite possibilities that lay beyond. With a final farewell to the seeker, Assal continued her descent to the base of the pyramid, her mind filled with the weight of the knowledge she had gained. The people at the base welcomed her back warmly, their simple, grounded existence a stark contrast to the overwhelming forces of the apex. As she prepared to leave the square pyramid universe, Assal reflected on the journey she had taken. This world had shown her that power, knowledge, and survival were all intertwined, but that the pursuit of those things came with a cost. The apex held the answers, but it also held the weight of the universe itself. With a final glance at the towering pyramid behind her, Assal stepped through the portal, ready for the next chapter in her journey. The spiritual significance of living near the apex, where gravity pulls inward toward a singular point, and how the people here have created advanced technologies to manipulate these forces. Chapter 12, The Cone-Shaped Universe, Revisit, Climate, Nature, Civilization, and Religion. The cone-shaped universe is one of stark vertical differentiation, where climate and conditions become increasingly severe as one approaches the apex. At the base, the climate is warm and fertile, with abundant sunlight and gentle rains nurturing vast fields, forests, and rivers. The lowlands are rich with life, as the light gravity and mild temperatures create an environment where flora and fauna flourish. Moving upward, the climate becomes harsher. Midway up the cone, the temperature drops, the winds grow stronger, and vegetation becomes sparse, clinging to rocky outcroppings. The gravitational pull intensifies, making life more difficult the higher one goes. At the apex, the air is thin, the landscape barren, and the gravity overwhelming. Few life forms exist here, and those that are small, tough, and adapted to survive in extreme conditions. Civilization in the cone-shaped universe mirrors the climate's gradient. At the base, society thrives in harmony with the natural world. Large, sprawling Chapter 12, The Cone-Shaped Universe, Revisit, Climate, Nature, Civilization, and Religion. The cone-shaped universe is one of stark vertical differentiation, where climate and conditions become increasingly severe as one approaches the apex. At the base, the climate is warm and fertile, with abundant sunlight and gentle rains nurturing vast fields, forests, and rivers. The lowlands are rich with life, as the light gravity and mild temperatures create an environment where flora and fauna flourish. Moving upward, the climate becomes harsher. Midway up the cone, the temperature drops, the winds grow stronger, and vegetation becomes sparse, clinging to rocky outcroppings. The gravitational pull intensifies, making life more difficult the higher one goes. At the apex, the air is thin, the landscape barren, and the gravity overwhelming. Few life forms exist here, and those that are small, tough, and adapted to survive in extreme conditions. Civilization in the cone-shaped universe mirrors the climate's gradient. At the base, society thrives in harmony with the natural world. Large, sprawling plains, built to integrate with the landscape. The people here lead peaceful lives, focused on agriculture, art, and community. Their culture celebrates the abundance and balance of nature, and their technology is centered around sustainability and living in harmony with the environment. As one moves higher up the cone, society becomes more industrious and focused on survival. The mid-level cities are compact and fortified, built into the cliffs to withstand the harsher winds and gravity. These people are resourceful and innovative, relying on technology to manage the increasingly difficult conditions. At the apex, only a few dwell, the spiritual elite, who believe that the physical hardship of living near the top brings them closer to the divine. These ascetic individuals live in isolated temples, where they devote their lives to meditation, endurance, and seeking spiritual enlightenment through overcoming the natural challenges of the world. Religion in the cone-shaped universe is closely tied to the journey from the base to the apex. At the base, where life is easy and plentiful, the people worship gods of fertility, abundance, and harmony, believing that the universe is a benevolent force that provides for them. Their temples are open and integrated with nature, with rituals that celebrate the cycles of growth and harvest. As one ascends the cone, religious beliefs shift toward resilience and survival. In the mid-levels, the people worship deities of strength, perseverance, and protection, seeking blessings to survive the increasing challenges of their environment. At the apex, religion takes on a more ascetic tone. The spiritual elite follow a path of asceticism, believing that by enduring the crushing gravity and harsh conditions, they can transcend the physical world and reach a higher state of spiritual enlightenment. Their temples are small, isolated shrines, and their rituals involve meditative practices aimed at connecting with the deeper forces of the universe. The ultimate goal of their faith is to achieve unity with the divine through overcoming the physical hardships of the apex, seeing the extreme conditions as a test of their will and spirit. Plains, built to integrate with the landscape. The people here lead peaceful lives, focused on agriculture, art, and community. Their culture celebrates the abundance and balance of nature, and their technology is centered around sustainability and living in harmony with the environment. As one moves higher up the cone, society becomes more industrious and focused on survival. The mid-level cities are compact and fortified, built into the cliffs to withstand the harsher winds and gravity. These people are resourceful and innovative, relying on technology to manage the increasingly difficult conditions. At the apex, only a few dwell, the spiritual elite, who believe that the physical hardship of living near the top brings them closer to the divine. These ascetic individuals live in isolated temples, where they devote their lives to meditation, endurance, and seeking spiritual enlightenment through overcoming the natural challenges of the world. Religion in the cone-shaped universe is closely tied to the journey from the base to the apex. At the base, where life is easy and plentiful, the people worship gods of fertility, abundance, and harmony, believing that the universe is a benevolent force that provides for them. Their temples are open and integrated with nature, with rituals that celebrate the cycles of growth and harvest. As one ascends the cone, religious beliefs shift toward resilience and survival. In the mid-levels, the people worship deities of strength, perseverance, and protection, seeking blessings to survive the increasing challenges of their environment. At the apex, religion takes on a more ascetic tone. The spiritual elite follow a path of asceticism, believing that by enduring the crushing gravity and harsh conditions, they can transcend the physical world and reach a higher state of spiritual enlightenment. Their temples are small, isolated shrines, and their rituals involve meditative practices aimed at connecting with the deeper forces of the universe. The ultimate goal of their faith is to achieve unity with the divine through overcoming the physical hardships of the apex, seeing the extreme conditions as a test of their will and spirit. Assal stepped back through the portal into the cone-shaped universe, and immediately, she felt the familiar sensation of gravity pulling at her in strange ways. The world around her was structured in a way that was both expansive and confining, wide and open at the base, yet narrowing upward into a single point, the apex. This time, Assal wasn't here to simply climb toward the apex, but to understand the deeper meaning of life and technology in this peculiar world. At the base of the cone, life was vibrant and plentiful. The gravity here was minimal, allowing the people to move freely, their movements light and graceful. Assal could feel the ease of life in this region, as if the world itself was built for leisure and harmony. The inhabitants, dressed in flowing garments, moved about the sprawling cities with a kind of relaxed elegance, their lives seemingly untouched by the harsh forces of the universe that loomed above. The architecture of the base reflected the wide openness of the environment. Buildings were vast, circular, and spread out, with intricate gardens and parks filling the spaces between them. It was a peaceful existence, one where the gentle pull of gravity made it easy for the inhabitants to live in harmony with their surroundings. As Assal walked through the streets, she noticed that the people here seemed content, living in a world where the forces of the universe barely touched them. She spoke with an elder, a woman with silver hair that floated gently in the light gravity. "We live in the abundance of the base," the elder explained, her voice soft and calm. "The forces here are mild, and life is easy. But we know that as we ascend, the world changes. Gravity pulls harder, and only those with the strength to endure the journey make it higher." "Do you ever wish to go higher?" Assal asked. The elder smiled faintly. "No, my path is here, in the calm of the base. But others, they seek the challenge. They believe the apex holds something greater, a deeper understanding of the universe. We all contribute to the journey in our own way. Some remain grounded, while others rise. The middle layers, the journey of growth." As Assal ascended the cone, the gravity intensified, pulling her more sharply toward the center. The landscape became steeper, and the people here had adapted to the change in forces. The inhabitants of the middle layers were leaner and stronger, their bodies built to withstand the increasing gravitational pull. They moved with purpose, each step carefully calculated to conserve energy and strength. The cities in the middle layers were built vertically, rising in tiers that clung to the sides of the cone. The buildings here were not as sprawling as those at the base. Instead, they were compact and sturdy, designed to resist the growing weight of the world. Advanced technologies were visible everywhere, devices that manipulated gravity, allowing the people to move more easily despite the increased forces. Assal met with a group of engineers who specialized in developing these gravity manipulation technologies. They showed her how their society had adapted to the gravitational pull of the cone, using machines that created counter forces to balance the weight. "We've learned to work with gravity," one of the engineers explained, showing Assal a device that harnessed the very pull of the universe. "Instead of fighting it, we use it. These machines allow us to move materials, build structures, and transport people up and down the cone without exhausting ourselves." Assal marveled at the ingenuity of these people. They had taken the very forces that made life difficult and turned them into tools for survival and advancement. The people here were focused on growth, both physical and intellectual. Their culture valued perseverance and innovation, constantly pushing the boundaries of what was possible in their gravity-bound world. "Do many try to ascend further?" Assal asked one of the engineers. The engineer nodded. "Yes, but not all make it. The apex is a place of great power, but it's also a place of great challenge. Only those who are truly prepared can survive the journey. The gravity is so intense that it crushes everything in its path. But those who make it to the top, they return with knowledge and wisdom that changes them forever. The apex, a test of endurance and enlightenment." Assal continued her climb, moving toward the apex with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. The higher she went, the more intense the gravitational pull became. Every step was a struggle, her body fighting against the weight that pressed down on her from all sides. The landscape was barren now, with only the hardiest of plants and animals clinging to life in the harsh conditions. The cities were fewer here, smaller and more fortified against the crushing gravity. The people who lived in these upper regions were different from those below. They were hardened by the journey, their bodies compact and powerful, their minds sharp and focused. These were the seekers, the ones who had devoted their lives to understanding the universe by enduring its most intense forces. As she neared the apex, Assal met a group of spiritual leaders, ascetics who had climbed to the top of the cone not just for survival, but for enlightenment. These people lived in small, isolated temples, their existence defined by meditation and introspection. They believed that the apex was a place of transformation, where the physical and spiritual worlds converged. "Why do you stay here?" Assal asked one of the ascetics, an old man whose body seemed impossibly strong for his age. "Because the apex reveals the truth," the ascetic replied, his voice deep and calm. "Here, at the top, gravity pulls everything inward. The forces are so strong that they strip away all illusions. What remains is the core of existence, the very essence of the universe. It's a place of clarity, but only for those who can endure it." Assal could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her, not just physically but mentally. The closer she came to the apex, the more she understood that this place was not just about survival, it was about revelation. The people who lived here had chosen to live in a world where every day was a test of endurance, but that endurance had given them insights that those below could never understand. The apex itself was a point of unimaginable gravitational intensity. Assal could barely stand as she reached the top, her body trembling under the pressure. The air was thin, the landscape desolate, and yet there was a stillness here, a sense of peace that belied the crushing forces all around her. She sat down at the apex, her mind racing with the weight of everything she had experienced. Here, at the top of the cone, time seemed to slow, reality bending under the strain of the universe's pull. It was a place of profound isolation, but also of profound connection to the universe, to the forces that shaped all life. For the people who lived here, the apex was not just a place of physical challenge, but a spiritual one. It represented the ultimate test of willpower, the final step in a journey toward understanding. And for those who survived, it offered a glimpse into the deepest truths of the universe. Descent and reflection. As Assal descended the cone once more, she reflected on the journey she had taken. The cone-shaped universe was a place of extremes, where life was defined by the forces that pulled everything inward. At the base, life was abundant and easy, while at the apex, survival required strength, endurance, and spiritual insight. Each level of the cone represented a different way of life, from the relaxed contentment of the base dwellers to the intellectual innovation of the middle layers, and finally to the spiritual transcendence of the apex. The people here had learned to adapt not just to the physical forces of their world, but to the deeper, more existential challenges that those forces represented. As she prepared to leave the cone-shaped universe, Assal felt a sense of awe and respect for the people who lived here. They had created a society that embraced the unique challenges of their world, using those challenges to grow stronger, wiser, and more connected to the universe around them. With one last look at the towering cone behind her, Assal stepped through the portal, ready for the next chapter of her journey. Chapter 13, The Cylindrical Universe, Revisit, Climate, Nature, Civilization, and Religion. In the cylindrical universe, the forces of gravity and climate spiral along the axis, creating unique environmental conditions that vary depending on proximity to the central axis. The climate is mostly temperate, with gentle winds that follow the cylindrical curvature, forming stable weather patterns near the axis. However, as one moves outward, these winds become more intense, creating strong currents that sweep along the surface. Rainfall is generally moderate, but it tends to gather in circular basins, forming large lakes and rivers that flow in spirals around the cylinder. Nature in this universe adapts to the spiral forces. Trees, plants, and rivers follow the flow of gravity, with flora growing in twisting patterns and water bodies spiraling along the land. The wildlife is uniquely shaped to navigate this environment, with animals evolving to move smoothly through the spiraling gravitational fields. Species here are agile, their bodies adapted to quick, fluid movements that mirror the spiral's path. Civilization in the cylindrical universe is highly advanced, focused on using the natural spiral of the world to its advantage. Cities are built along the curvature, with architecture that twists and spirals upwards, using the natural forces of gravity to create energy-efficient buildings and transportation systems. The people have developed technologies that harness the rotational forces for everything from energy production to communication, creating a society that values adaptability, innovation, and balance. Religion in the cylindrical universe is centered on the worship of the flowing ones, deities believed to govern the spiral forces that shape their world. The spiral itself is seen as a divine manifestation of life's cyclical nature, and the people seek to align themselves with these forces through meditation, ritual, and ceremony. Their temples are constructed along the central axis, where the pull of gravity is strongest, and their religious practices involve synchronized movements and prayers that mimic the flow of the spiral. The ultimate goal of their faith is to achieve spiritual balance by living in harmony with the spiral's flow, believing that by doing so, they can transcend the limitations of time and space and tap into the deeper truths of the universe. As Assal stepped back into the cylindrical universe, she immediately felt the familiar pull of gravity spiraling along the axis. Unlike the other universes she had visited, where gravity pulled uniformly downward or in varying intensities, here it was different. Gravity tugged sideways, constantly drawing her toward the center of the cylinder's axis. This world was a ribbon of land wrapped around a central axis, and the forces that shaped it were dynamic, always moving, always spiraling. The landscape was familiar, but Assal could already sense the subtle changes she hadn't fully grasped during her first visit. Life here wasn't just about adapting to the strange gravitational forces, it was about thriving in them. The inhabitants of this universe had mastered the art of moving with the spiral, using the rotational forces to power their cities, their transportation, and even their way of life. As she walked through the first settlement, she marveled at the architecture. Buildings spiraled upward, hugging the curvature of the cylinder like vines wrapped around a tree. The structures were sleek and aerodynamic, designed to withstand the constant pull of gravity that shifted depending on one's proximity to the central axis. She could see the way the buildings twisted, their angles carefully calculated to maintain balance in this ever-moving world. Assal noticed the inhabitants moving gracefully through the streets, their bodies adapted to the flow of the cylindrical world. Their movements were fluid, in tune with the natural rotation of their environment. They seemed to float more than walk, gliding effortlessly along the spiral paths that wound through the city. Their clothing, too, was designed to catch the gentle winds created by the constant movement of the world, allowing them to harness the forces of gravity to travel with minimal effort. One of the inhabitants noticed Assal's curiosity and approached her with a friendly smile. The being's form was tall and elegant, their skin shimmering in the soft light that filtered through the curved horizon. "Welcome back, traveler," the being said, their voice soft but resonant. "You look like someone who has seen many worlds." Assal nodded. "I've traveled through many universes, but this one, it always amazes me. How do you live with such constant motion?" The being gestured to the spiraling city around them. "We don't just live with it, we thrive in it. The spiral is our life. It shapes everything we do, from how we build our homes to how we travel. The key is not to fight the forces, but to flow with them." As they walked together, the being explained how their society had developed technologies that harness the rotational forces of the cylindrical universe. Their energy systems were powered by the constant movement of the spiral, with large turbines placed near the axis to capture the immense rotational energy. These turbines powered everything from the city's infrastructure to the advanced machines that allowed the inhabitants to travel great distances along the spiral in a matter of moments. Assal was fascinated by the elegance of the technology. In her own world, energy had to be extracted from resources: fuel, wind, solar, but here, the energy was inherent in the very shape of the universe. The cylindrical geometry had provided a limitless source of power, and the people had learned to tap into it seamlessly. "Do you ever travel along the entire length of the cylinder?" Assal asked, curious about the scale of their world. The being nodded. "We do. We have vehicles that use the spiral to move rapidly from one end of the cylinder to the other. But we also travel inward, toward the central axis. Life there is different, gravity is stronger, and time feels slower. The closer you get to the axis, the more the world bends, both physically and mentally. Assal thought about what it must be like to live near the axis, where the gravitational pull was the strongest. It would be a place where the forces of the universe were concentrated, where time and space themselves began to twist. What is life like there, near the center? The being's expression became thoughtful. Life near the axis is challenging. The gravity is intense, and the spiral tightens, making it difficult to move. But those who live there are masters of balance. They've learned to control the forces in ways we can't even imagine. It's said that they've developed technologies that can bend time, allowing them to move through the spiral in ways that defy logic. Assal was intrigued. She had seen so many different technologies and ways of life during her travels, but the idea of bending time itself was something beyond her understanding. "Can I visit the axis?" The being hesitated for a moment before nodding. "It's possible, but dangerous. The forces there are strong, and only those who are prepared can handle them. But if you wish to see it for yourself, I can take you part of the way." The journey to the axis. With the being as her guide, Assal began her journey toward the axis. The path wound through the spiraling landscape, becoming steeper and narrower the closer they got to the center. The gravitational pull intensified with each step, tugging at her body, making her movements heavier and slower. The buildings became smaller, more fortified, designed to withstand the immense pressure near the axis. As they approached the inner region, Assal could see the effects of the intense gravitational forces. The landscape was warped, the ground curving inward, and the sky above seemed to twist in on itself. The people who lived here were different from those further out. They were more compact, their bodies built for endurance, their minds sharp and focused on controlling the forces around them. The inhabitants of the inner region had developed advanced gravity manipulation technology. Assal watched in awe as they used devices to bend the spiraling gravitational forces, allowing them to move freely despite the crushing weight. They moved with a calm precision, their movements calculated to conserve energy and avoid being overwhelmed by the intense pull of the axis. One of the axis dwellers noticed Assal and her guide and approached them. The figure was small but powerful, their presence commanding. "You've come far," the dweller said, their voice deep and resonant. "Few outsiders venture this close to the axis." Assal felt the weight of their words, both literal and metaphorical. "What is it like to live here, at the center of everything?" The dweller smiled faintly. "It is a life of balance. The forces here are immense, but we've learned to work with them, to bend them to our will. Time behaves differently near the axis. What feels like hours to you might only be minutes here. We use that to our advantage, moving through time and space in ways that others cannot." Assal felt a shiver run down her spine. The idea of manipulating time, of bending it to one's will, was both fascinating and terrifying. "How do you do it?" The dweller gestured toward the device they wore on their wrist, a small, intricate machine that seemed to pulse with energy. "This device taps into the rotational forces of the universe. It allows us to manipulate time by controlling the flow of gravity. We can slow time, speed it up, or even step outside of it for brief moments." Assal was speechless. She had seen many incredible things during her journey, but this was something beyond anything she had imagined. The ability to control time itself, to step outside of the normal flow of reality, was a power that only a few could comprehend. As she watched the axis dwellers move with a calm precision, Assal realized that life here wasn't just about surviving the gravitational forces, it was about mastering them. The people who lived near the axis had achieved a level of understanding and control that few could ever hope to reach. Returning to the spiral, after spending time near the axis, Assal and her guide began their journey back to the outer regions of the cylinder. The gravitational pull lessened with each step, and the landscape became more familiar. But Assal couldn't shake the feeling of awe that had settled over her. The people of the cylindrical universe had not only adapted to their unique environment, they had mastered it, using the very forces that shaped their world to their advantage. As they returned to the outer regions, Assal felt a deep sense of respect for the inhabitants of the cylindrical universe. Their ability to harness the rotational forces of their world, to bend gravity and time to their will, was a testament to their ingenuity and resilience. With a final glance at the spiraling cities behind her, Assal prepared to leave the cylindrical universe once more. She had seen the power of rotational forces and the incredible ways in which the inhabitants had used those forces to shape their lives. Now, it was time to reflect on the journey she had taken, and the lessons she had learned from each shaped universe. Chapter 14. Conclusion and Reflections. Climate, Nature, Civilization, and Religion. In the final universe of Assal's journey, the landscape seems to stretch endlessly across time and space, embodying the vastness of everything she has experienced. The climate here is a balance of extremes, where light and darkness exist simultaneously in different regions, reflecting the duality of the shaped universes she has explored. The air is thin and charged with energy, making every step feel like a connection to the very essence of the universe itself. Nature in this world is unlike any other Assal has encountered. Flora and fauna shift constantly, never settling into one form. Trees morph into spirals, cubes, and pyramids, while the ground beneath her feet ripples like a Mobius strip. The wildlife moves with the same fluidity, their forms adapting to the gravitational and dimensional forces at play. These creatures, much like the civilizations Assal has seen, have evolved to thrive in a reality where nothing is static, and all things flow from one state to another. Civilization here is a synthesis of everything Assal has witnessed. The cities are multidimensional, incorporating aspects of the cylindrical, conical, cubical, and tesseract worlds. Structures rise and fall in intricate, geometric patterns, designed to mirror the laws of each universe. The people of this final world are enlightened, having drawn from the knowledge of every shaped universe to create a society that embraces the infinite possibilities of reality. Their technology is advanced, but they live with a profound spiritual understanding of the forces that govern their world, striving for balance and harmony. The religion in this universe is a culmination of all the faiths Assal has encountered. Here, the people worship the universal shapers, deities who are believed to have crafted all the different shaped universes. Their temples are built in perfect geometric harmony, with each structure reflecting a different universe's design. Rituals involve meditation on the nature of existence, where followers contemplate the flow of time, space, and gravity. The ultimate goal of their faith is to transcend the boundaries of the current existence and achieve unity with the universal forces that shape all things, recognizing that all realities are connected in an infinite web of creation. Assal stood at the edge of the last portal, feeling the weight of her journey pressing down on her like the pull of gravity itself. She had traveled through worlds shaped by cylinders, cones, cubes, and tesseracts. She had seen universes bend time, defy space, and warp the very fabric of reality. Each world had left its mark on her, reshaping not only her understanding of physics and geometry but also her perception of existence itself. As she reflected on everything she had learned, Assal realized that the shape of the universe did more than just define the physical laws that governed it. The shape influenced everything: how civilizations developed, how beings evolved, how they moved, thought, and survived. Geometry wasn't just a framework for understanding space. It was a force that shaped life, society, and even consciousness. In the cylindrical universe, she had seen how gravity spiraled along the axis, creating a dynamic, ever-moving society where rotational forces powered everything. The inhabitants had learned to flow with the forces, rather than resist them, turning the spiral into a source of energy, movement, and even time manipulation. The lesson there was simple but profound. Life thrives when it learns to work with the forces of the universe, not against them. In the conical universe, the journey from the wide, fertile base to the crushing gravity of the apex had taught her the value of balance and endurance. The people at the base lived in comfort, while those at the apex sought spiritual enlightenment through hardship. The shape of the cone mirrored the ascent toward understanding. The higher you climbed, the more intense the challenges, but also the greater the rewards. It was a world where gravity was not just a physical force, but a metaphor for personal growth. The cubical universe had shown her a world of sharp angles and boundaries, where life was divided between the central, balanced faces and the intense, crushing forces at the edges and corners. The beings of this universe had developed two distinct forms: those who lived in the relative safety of the faces, and those who endured the extremes of the edges. Their society was a testament to resilience, to adapting to the harshest conditions without losing their sense of identity and purpose. In the Tesseract universe, Assal had experienced something entirely new, a reality where time and space intertwined, where beings moved through dimensions she could barely perceive. Here, existence wasn't bound by linear time. The people lived in multiple realities at once, experiencing all outcomes, all possibilities, without regret or fear. This universe had challenged her understanding of causality, of choice, and of the very nature of reality itself. And then there was the Mobius universe, where every step led back to the beginning. It was a world where progress didn't follow a straight line, but a loop, an endless cycle of movement and return. The beings here had learned to embrace the loop, finding meaning in the repetition, in the patterns that emerged from an existence without a clear endpoint. It was a universe that asked a simple question: does life need a destination, or is the journey enough? As Assal thought back on her experiences in the square pyramid universe, she realized that the shape of the pyramid had reflected the societal structures that developed within it. Power, knowledge, and survival were stratified, with each level representing a different way of living and understanding the world. Those at the apex, who endured the greatest gravitational forces, had reached a level of insight and wisdom that could only come through hardship. But the base dwellers were just as important, their lives peaceful and stable, supporting the entire pyramid. It was a delicate balance, much like the forces that governed their world. Through all these shaped universes, one theme stood out above all others: adaptation. Every world had taught its inhabitants to adapt to the unique forces that shaped it, and in doing so, they had developed cultures, technologies, and philosophies that reflected their environment. Whether they harnessed gravity to power their cities or used time as a tool for exploration, the people of these shaped universes had learned to live in harmony with their world's geometry. As she prepared to leave the shaped universes behind, Assal found herself asking deeper questions about her own world. Could her universe, too, be shaped in ways she hadn't yet considered? Was the sphere, the familiar geometry of her reality, just one of many possibilities? And if so, what did that mean for her understanding of the fundamental forces that governed her life: gravity, time, space? The shaped universes had taught her that the geometry of space wasn't just a backdrop to existence, it was an active, shaping force. And if that was true, then perhaps her own world could be reimagined, its laws of physics seen through a new lens. What other forces, invisible and subtle, might be shaping the course of life, history, and even consciousness? With a final deep breath, Assal stepped through the portal one last time, leaving the shaped universes behind but carrying their lessons with her. She had seen worlds where gravity spiraled, time looped, and space folded in on itself. She had met beings who had mastered the art of living in harmony with these forces, creating societies that reflected the very shape of their universe. As she returned to her own universe, Assal felt different, wiser, perhaps, but also more aware of the infinite possibilities that lay beyond the familiar sphere. The journey had shown her that life, in all its complexity, was shaped not just by the physical forces of the universe, but by the geometry that framed those forces. And now, as she looked up at the stars in her own sky, she knew that the journey was far from over. The shaped universes had opened her eyes to a cosmos filled with infinite possibilities, and the path forward was as wide and open as the space between the stars. Final reflections. The shaped universes had taught Assal that the very structure of reality influenced not just the physical laws of each world, but the way life itself developed. From the harmonious spirals of the cylindrical universe to the meditative ascent of the conical universe, each shaped world had its own lessons to offer. But ultimately, these lessons weren't just about different universes, they were about understanding life in all its forms. Whether it was the endless loops of the Mobius world or the time-bending dimensions of the Tesseract, Assal had come to realize that existence itself was malleable, shaped by forces both seen and unseen. And now, with that knowledge, she was ready to explore the infinite possibilities of her own world and beyond. Conclusion: the geometry of life and existence. As Assal stepped away from the portals that had taken her through a myriad of shaped universes, she carried with her the profound understanding that reality itself is shaped not only by the physical forces that govern it but also by the very structure of the universe. Each world she visited, whether cylindrical, cubical, conical, or tesseract, offered a unique perspective on how the geometry of space influences everything from the laws of physics to the way civilizations develop and thrive. What became clear was that the shape of the universe shapes life itself. In the cylindrical universe, rotational forces led to a society that flowed with the spiral, harnessing gravity as a source of energy and even manipulating time. In the conical universe, life at each level reflected the increasing intensity of gravity, with those at the base living in peace while those at the apex pursued enlightenment through endurance and challenge. In the Tesseract universe, beings experienced time and space simultaneously, offering an entirely new way of perceiving reality. Each of these shaped universes illustrated the adaptability of life. No matter how extreme or unusual the conditions, civilizations found ways to not only survive but to flourish by embracing the forces around them. Whether they bent gravity to their will, adapted to crushing forces, or learned to navigate time loops, the inhabitants of these worlds demonstrated that life can thrive in the most unexpected places. Adaptation, then, is the key to existence, an essential truth that resonates across all realities. As Assal reflected on her journey, she realized that these worlds weren't just fascinating scientific puzzles, they were metaphors for the way all life evolves and grows. The beings of each universe had found harmony with the unique forces that shaped their world, and in doing so, they had achieved technological, philosophical, and spiritual advancements. The pursuit of knowledge, of pushing the boundaries of understanding, was a constant theme, whether it was through the mastery of time in the cylindrical universe or the spiritual enlightenment sought at the apex of the cone. Ultimately, Assal's journey through these shaped universes offered her a profound insight. The geometry of space is not just a backdrop to existence, it actively shapes it. The forces of gravity, time, and space don't merely influence the physical world, they define how life, thought, and even perception itself unfold. As she returned to her own universe, Assal knew that her understanding of reality had changed forever. She had seen that the possibilities of existence are as varied as the shapes of the universes themselves. And with that knowledge, she realized that her own world, the familiar sphere, was just one of countless possibilities in an infinite cosmos. Life, no matter its shape or form, always adapts. The universe, in all its vast complexity, is full of endless potential, and the journey to understanding it is never truly over. Epilogue: the echo of infinite shapes. As Assal stood on the edge of her world, gazing at the night sky, she knew that her journey through the shaped universes had not truly ended. Each universe had revealed its own mysteries, its own way of bending time, gravity, and space, and though she had returned to the familiar sphere, she could still feel the echo of those infinite shapes deep within her. In the cylindrical universe, she had learned that time could spiral, offering endless cycles of possibility. In the cubical world, she had seen how sharp edges could lead to both order and chaos. The conical universe had taught her that even at the extremes of gravity and endurance, there is a path to enlightenment. These lessons would never leave her. As much as she tried to settle back into the rhythms of the spherical world, she found herself longing for more. What other shapes could the universe take? What other laws might govern distant realities? She had only scratched the surface of what was possible, and she knew now that reality, like the universe itself, could take on countless forms. The stars twinkled above her, and in each point of light, she imagined a world shaped not by spheres, but by cones, cubes, or something entirely unimaginable. Assal smiled, knowing that her journey was far from over.